I thought I was just unlucky. One moment, I was struggling to survive in my real world, raising my dead sister's children alone. And the next, I woke up inside a historical novel. Not as the hero, not as the prince, not even as a noble, but as a guard. And then a system appeared. It told me I had one mission: make the two Tyrant brothers, the Cold Crown Prince and the ruthless Second Prince, become king and general. If I succeeded, I could go home. So I tried to obey. I tried to survive. I tried to stay away from them. But the more I got involved, the more those two terrifying brothers looked at me like I belonged to them. And then I discovered the truth. The system was never mine. It was theirs. And worse, those two brothers? They had already loved me, long before this world even existed. And when I finally tried to leave, they destroyed the entire system, just to keep me. I thought I was helping them complete their fate, until I realized I was the one they had been chasing in every world. The first thing I felt was pain. Not the sharp kind. Not the kind that made you scream. This was worse. It was the old, heavy kind that had settled into my bones after too many sleepless nights, too many part-time jobs, too many mornings waking before dawn to pack two tiny lunch boxes with smiling cartoon toothpicks because my niece cried if her tomatoes looked lonely. I remembered the fluorescent lights in the convenience store, the buzzing freezer, the ache in my wrists, then my nephew's voice over the phone, sleepy and soft. "Uncle, are you coming home soon?" I had smiled even though he couldn't see it. Soon. That had been the last thing I said. Then, darkness. And now, I shot upright with a violent gasp. My lungs dragged in air like I had been drowning. Silk brushed against my skin. Not my old blanket. Not my tiny rented room with the peeling wallpaper and the broken standing fan I kept promising to replace. I froze. The bed beneath me was too soft. The air smelled wrong too, sandalwood, ink, cold stone, and something faintly metallic, like old rain on iron. A gauzy bed curtain stirred in a draft. I stared, then stared harder. The canopy above me was embroidered in gold thread. The room was enormous. Carved wooden screens. Polished black furniture. A low table with a bronze incense burner still smoking faintly. Heavy curtains. Candlelight. No convenience store. No cracked phone charger. No school bags by the door. No tiny socks hanging from the back of a chair because my niece never put laundry where it belonged. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. "No," I whispered. My voice came out rough. Lower than I expected. Not quite mine, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I shoved the blanket aside and nearly tripped over the hem of a long white robe. A robe. I looked down at myself. Long sleeves. Fine fabric. Pale hands. Lean fingers. A body that felt familiar and wrong at the same time, like wearing someone else's face stretched over my own memory. I stumbled toward the polished bronze mirror standing near the wall. The man staring back at me was beautiful in the delicate, doomed kind of way. Long dark hair tied loosely at the back. Pale skin. Tired eyes. A face I knew. I knew it because I had read it. Once. Late at night, while heating instant noodles and ignoring my own collapsing life. A historical BL novel I had clicked on because the comments called it a train wreck with gorgeous villains. I remembered rage reading it between work shifts. A cursed palace. Two Tyrant brothers. A kingdom drowning in blood. And one side character who died so quickly I had laughed at how unfair it was. My lips parted. No way. The face in the mirror looked back at me in mute agreement. No. No, no, no. This is not happening. I pressed both hands to the table, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The side character's name surfaced in my memory like something dragging itself out of a swamp. Edrin. A minor palace guard. Assigned to the Second Prince. Loyal. Pretty. Disposable. Dead before Chapter 10. I went completely still. Then I pointed at my own reflection. You. The reflection pointed back. You died. The reflection, incredibly, had nothing helpful to say. I slapped both hands over my face. This is insane. I am dead. I'm dead, and this is some kind of overworked hallucination. Great. Amazing. Perfect. My brain finally snapped and chose historical gay suffering as my afterlife. A bright, cheerful female voice rang out inside my head. Correction, host is not dead. I screamed. Actually screamed. Then spun so fast I nearly took the mirror down with me. Who said that? System Siri at your service. A soft golden panel appeared in the air, right in front of my face. I stared at it. It sparkled. It had little decorative swirls on the corners. I hated it instantly. Welcome, host Edrin. Mission World. The Blood Crown Chronicles assigned role. Supporting character primary objective. Assist Crown Prince Caelan in ascending the throne. Assist Second Prince Rowan in becoming the Empire's strongest general. Reward. Possible return to original world. Failure penalty. Unknown smiley face. I stared at the smiling face made of light at the corner of the panel. Then I looked up at the ceiling. Then back at the panel. Then I said very calmly, "No." The system blinked. "No." "Yes, no." I jabbed a finger at the glowing screen. "Absolutely no. I'm not helping anybody become anything. I don't even help myself become anything. I work, I cry quietly, I buy discounted eggs, and apparently I die from stress. That is the limit of my skill set. Host, please take your mission seriously." I am taking it seriously. That's why I'm refusing. I began pacing in my ridiculous white robes. Do you know what kind of people those two are? Caelan and Rowan are lunatics. The comments section called them hot war crimes. That is not an official character classification. It should be. I stopped pacing and pointed at the panel again. No. Find someone else. I am not becoming emotional support for two homicidal princes. The system's tone turned almost pitying. Host has no authority to reject a main route mission. I narrowed my eyes. Then what happens if I ignore you? A pause. Then the panel changed. Notice, host may remain trapped in this world indefinitely if mission is not completed. Successful completion may allow return to original world. My breath caught. For one ugly, painful second, my mind stopped here in this strange room and went somewhere much smaller. A child's drawing taped to a refrigerator. A pair of tiny shoes by the door. My niece's stubborn little face when she crossed her arms and said, "Uncle, don't die, okay?" I swallowed hard enough to hurt. If there was even a chance, even a small one. I clenched my hands. "When you say return," I said quietly, "you mean really return? Conditional possibility of return upon mission completion." That sounds fake. All systems are built on hope, host. That sounds extremely fake. But my voice came out weaker this time. Because fake or not, hope was still hope. And people like me were stupid enough to crawl toward it bleeding. I let out a long breath and scrubbed both hands down my face. Fine. The system brightened immediately. Host has accepted the mission. Temporarily, I snapped. And only because I want to go home. The panel spun happily. Wonderful. Then let us begin your survival strategy. I already hated that wording. What survival strategy? A smaller panel popped open. Beginner mission. Increase Prince Rowan's trust by 10 points. Reward. Basic survival package. Failure penalty. Unknown. I stared at it. That's surprisingly normal. The panel shimmered. Then updated. Submission added. Fall into Prince Rowan's arms within 10 minutes. I blinked. Then blinked again. What? Please proceed quickly, host. I looked at the panel. Then at the ceiling. Then back at the panel. What do you mean, fall into his arms? Exactly as written. I pointed both hands at the screen. That is not political strategy. That is harassment. Physical proximity accelerates emotional bonding. That sounds like a lawsuit. This world has no lawsuits. Of course it doesn't. I wanted to lie down on the floor and let history kill me. Instead, because apparently I had never respected myself in any lifetime, I yanked open the chamber doors and stormed into the corridor. The hallway outside was lined with stone pillars and red lanterns. Servants in muted robes passed with lowered heads. Somewhere far away, metal clashed rhythmically. Training yard. Of course. Of course the bloodthirsty second prince would be in the training yard. I marched toward the sound, jaw clenched, while Siri chirped directions in my head like a demonic map app. Turn left. Stop helping. Proceed forward. I said stop helping. You have 7 minutes remaining. 7? Why is there a timer? I rounded the final stone archway and nearly walked straight into chaos. The training yard sprawled wide under the pale morning sky. Soldiers lined the edges in disciplined silence. Wooden dummies stood splintered to one side. 2 guards were sparring in the center until the entire atmosphere shifted. No warning. No announcement. Just pressure. The kind that made every instinct in my body scream danger. Then I saw him. Prince Rowan stood at the center of the yard with a sword in one hand, black hair tied high, sleeves rolled to his forearms, expression carved from frost and bad intentions. He was younger than I remembered from the novel. Sharper. More alive. The kind of handsome that made people make catastrophic choices and then die regretting them. His training partner was on the ground, breathing hard. Rowan looked bored. Terrifyingly bored. One of the soldiers near me muttered under his breath, "His Highness is in a foul mood again." Another whispered back, "That implies he has other moods." I would have laughed if my soul hadn't already left my body. 5 minutes remaining. Siri sang. "I hate you," I muttered. "Please hurry." I took one cautious step backward. Then another. A tactical retreat. A smart retreat. A deeply survival-oriented retreat. My heel caught on the uneven stone. I windmilled. My entire life flashed before my eyes. Oh no! I pitched backward and slammed straight into a solid chest. An arm wrapped around my waist instantly. Strong. Fast. Unyielding. The entire training yard went silent. So silent I could hear my own breathing. My eyes squeezed shut on instinct. Please don't let this be him. Please don't let this be him. A low, cold voice spoke directly above my ear. What exactly are you doing? I opened my eyes and found myself held against Prince Rowan. His grip was iron. His chest was warm through the thin layers of our robes. One of my hands had somehow ended up fisted in the front of his training uniform. I stared up at him. He stared down at me. The world stopped. Not metaphorically. Actually stopped. Because something changed in his face. Only for a second. His eyes, dark, sharp, unreadable, widened. Not much. Just enough to make my stomach drop. Like he had seen a ghost. Like he knew me. Like he had been waiting for this exact impossible moment and still hadn't been ready for it. Behind us, Siri exploded with joy. Mission success. Prince Rowan Trust plus 10 bonus trigger. Hidden route activated. Hidden route? What hidden route? What did that mean? I had bigger problems. Because Rowan still hadn't let go. And the entire training yard was staring at us like they were watching a man hold the knife that would kill him. I swallowed. Then, because my mouth had never once protected me in any universe, I blurted. Good morning. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Rowan's fingers tightened at my waist. And very softly, like the word had been dragged out of a grave, he said, Edrin. My blood ran cold. How did he say my name like that? Not like a prince addressing a guard. Not like a man recognizing a subordinate. But like someone who had once lost something precious. And had just found it standing stupidly in his arms. Then, from the stone balcony overlooking the training yard, another voice cut through the silence. Cool. Elegant. Deadly. Interesting. Every head in the courtyard snapped upward. Mine included. A man stood beneath the shade of the carved pavilion roof, dressed in dark royal robes, one hand resting lazily against the railing. Crown Prince Caelan. Beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, clean, distant, and lethal. His face was unreadable. His eyes were not. They were locked on me with a kind of stillness that made my pulse stumble. Not curiosity. Not irritation. Recognition. My skin went cold. No, absolutely not. One tyrant reacting like he knew me was already one problem too many. I did not need both. Caelan's gaze moved from my face to Rowan's hand at my waist, then back to me. And for the first time since waking up in this cursed world, I understood something with complete, bone-deep certainty. I had made a terrible mistake. Because those were not the eyes of men meeting me for the first time. Those were the eyes of men who had already decided. I was not getting away again. I made it exactly 3 hours before I considered throwing myself into the palace pond. Not to die. Just to see if cold water could reset my life. It couldn't possibly make things worse. Then again, I had thought that yesterday, and now both tyrant brothers were looking at me like I had walked out of their nightmares and back into their hands. So clearly my judgment was not to be trusted. I stood outside Prince Rowan's chambers with a tray of medicine in my hands and the expression of a man being led to public execution. Steam curled from the ceramic bowl. The bitter herbal smell stabbed me straight in the nose. A maid beside me bowed her head and whispered, Guard Edrin. His Highness has refused medicine since dawn. Wonderful, I said flatly. She looked startled, probably because palace guards weren't supposed to sound like exhausted office workers at the end of a 12-hour shift. I corrected myself weakly. I understand. I did not understand. Who refused medicine on purpose. Actually, never mind. Rowan did. That was on brand. The maid lowered her voice even further. The physician said his shoulder wound reopened during training yesterday. I froze. Shoulder wound. She blinked. You didn't know? No, because apparently no one in this palace believed in sharing critical information before assigning me to the homicidal prince. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled through my nose. A familiar bright chime rang inside my skull. Daily mission available. I closed my eyes. No. Please care for Prince Rowan's wound. No. Reward. Truth Fragment X1. My eyes snapped open. What? The glowing panel appeared in the corner of my vision like an intrusive pop-up ad from hell. Daily mission. Care for Prince Rowan's shoulder wound. Reward. Truth Fragment X1 bonus reward. Affection plus 5 failure penalty. Prince Rowan's mood worsens. I stared at the words. Truth Fragment? That was new. Yesterday, all Siri had offered me was vague hope and emotional sabotage. Now she was dangling information. And I needed information. Because there was no normal explanation for what had happened in the training yard. Rowan had looked at me like he knew me. Caelan had looked at me like he had found me. And I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling in a borrowed room, wondering if I had somehow landed in the wrong version of the story. I tightened my grip on the tray. Fine, I muttered. The maid blinked. Your Highness. Not you. I forced a smile so strained it probably counted as a threat. I was talking to my bad decisions. Before she could ask questions, I knocked once on Rowan's chamber door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. The maid looked increasingly pale. I looked increasingly dead inside. Then from within. Get out. Cold. Flat. Dangerous. The maid physically flinched. I stared at the door. Then I raised my voice just enough to carry. You should take your medicine. Silence. Then. I said get out. I glanced at the maid. She looked one breath away from fainting. Wonderful. Perfect. Excellent. I shifted the tray to one hand, pushed the chamber door open with the other, and stepped inside. The maid made a tiny strangled noise behind me, but I was already in too deep to retreat. Rowan's room was dim despite the morning light. Heavy curtains were half drawn over tall windows, leaving pale gold strips across the black floor. Weapons lined one wall. A low table was scattered with maps, sealing wax, and a dagger casually stabbed through a rolled military report because apparently paper had offended him. And there he was. Prince Rowan sat shirtless on the edge of his bed. I stopped dead. My brain left my body. I would like to say I handled this maturely. I did not. My first thought was, oh. My second thought was, that is a lot of shoulder. My third thought was, Siri planned this. That evil witch planned this. Because of course Rowan's wound was on his shoulder. Of course he was shirtless. Of course my life had become this specific kind of humiliation. His head turned toward me. Dark hair loose around his face. Sharp jaw. Bare skin marked with old scars and one fresh bandage wrapped diagonally over his left shoulder and chest. His expression was murderously blank. You walked in anyway. Yes, I said. His gaze dropped to the medicine tray, then lifted back to my face. Why? Because your psychotic ghost app offered me a truth fragment. Instead, I said, because if that wound gets infected and your arm falls off, I'm fairly certain I'll be blamed somehow. For 1 second, Rowan just stared at me. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. More like his face had briefly forgotten how to remain hostile. I see, he said. His voice had gone quieter. Worse somehow. I stepped forward and set the tray on the low table. Drink this. No. Why not? It's bitter. I turned to look at him. He looked back with the same cold, lethal expression he probably used before ordering executions. It's medicine, I said slowly. It's not a fruit smoothie. He blinked once. Then, to my horror, I realized I had just said something insane to a prince. A dangerous silence stretched between us. Then, from somewhere behind me, one of the chamber servants inhaled so sharply I thought he might die. Rowan looked at me. Really looked at me. And then he said with terrifying calm, everyone out. The servants vanished like smoke. The door shut. I was alone. With him. Half-dressed. Wounded. And increasingly impossible to survive. I stood there clutching my dignity with both hands while Rowan leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. You speak strangely, he said. Thank you. That wasn't praise. That's fine. I wasn't aiming for elegance. His gaze sharpened. You're not afraid of me. That was such a ridiculous statement I almost laughed. I am extremely afraid of you. You don't act like it. That's because panic has many forms. His mouth twitched again. It was subtle, but this time I definitely saw it. And that was somehow more alarming than if he had pulled a sword on me. I grabbed the medicine bowl and shoved it toward him. Drink. He didn't take it. Instead, he looked at me and said, bandage first. I stared. What? My shoulder. I looked at the bandage. Then at him. Then at the visible line of muscle disappearing under the white cloth wrapped around his waist. No. One dark eyebrow lifted. No. No. There are physicians. Professional ones. With training. You're here. That is not a qualification. He held my gaze for a long second. Then, very deliberately, he reached up and tugged the edge of the blood-stained bandage loose. I lunged forward on instinct. Wait! Too late. The linen slipped, revealing an angry red cut across his shoulder, half-healed and badly strained. I hissed through my teeth. Are you insane? Frequently. Stop moving. I set the medicine down and stepped closer before I could think too hard about what I was doing. His skin was warm. Too warm. And close. Far too close. I carefully peeled the loosened bandage back, trying not to look directly at the broad line of his chest or the old scars crossing his ribs. I failed a little. Not enough to lose my self-respect entirely. But enough. What happened? I asked, because if I kept talking maybe my brain wouldn't notice how near he was. Training. That's not an answer. It is if you know me. I shot him a flat look. He looked almost pleased by it. I dabbed medicine over the cut, and Rowan's muscles tightened under my fingers. Does it hurt? No. That means yes. He didn't deny it. I worked in silence for a moment, carefully wrapping a fresh bandage around his shoulder and across his chest. My fingers brushed his skin more than once. Every time, Rowan went very still. Not tense. Still. Like a wild animal deciding whether to bite or follow. My own pulse had become deeply unhelpful. I focused on the knot. On the cloth. On literally anything except the fact that I was kneeling between the knees of one of the most dangerous men in the Empire. Then Rowan said quietly, "You've done this before." I paused. My hands stilled against the bandage. And just like that, the room changed. Because yes, I had. Not in this world. But in my old one. My nephew used to scrape his knees climbing everything he wasn't supposed to climb. My niece once sliced her finger trying to help cut apples. I had patched fevers, bruises, nightmares, panic, tears, and all the 1,000 little disasters that came with trying to become a parent overnight when no one had prepared you. Something tightened in my throat. A few times, I said. Rowan's gaze didn't leave my face. With who? I tied the knot too tightly by accident. With people I cared about. He didn't respond. But something dark and unreadable moved through his expression. Then Siri chimed like she had been waiting for emotional vulnerability to become inconvenient. Mission complete. Prince Rowan affection +5 reward unlocked. Truth fragment X1. I nearly dropped the bandage scissors. A golden window opened in front of me. Truth fragment 01 original host candidates. 2 current host status. Irregular further access locked. My breath caught. Original host candidates. 2? Not 1. 2. I stared at the words so hard they nearly blurred. Irregular? What did that even mean? Edrin. I looked up too fast. Rowan was watching me. Too closely. My face must have given something away, because his eyes narrowed slightly. What is it? Nothing. A lie. I stood abruptly, putting a very necessary amount of distance between us. It's not. I stopped because yes, it was absolutely something. And no, I was not explaining to Prince Rowan that my invisible mission parasite had just confirmed my life was somehow even more suspicious than yesterday. I reached for the medicine bowl and thrust it at him again. Drink. His gaze lingered on me another second. Then mercifully, he took the bowl. He drank it in one smooth swallow without even flinching. I was impressed despite myself. That was disturbingly efficient. It's less painful than arguing with you. That's rude. It's accurate. I opened my mouth to retort when someone knocked sharply on the chamber door. Before I could move, it slid open. A palace attendant stepped inside, bent low, and said with visible tension, "Your Highness." His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, requests guard Edrin's presence. Every muscle in my body locked. No, absolutely not. I had already survived one brother this morning. That was my emotional budget for the day. Rowan's expression went cold instantly. Why? The attendant looked ready to die. The Crown Prince did not specify. Of course he didn't. Because Caelan struck me as exactly the kind of man who could summon people with 2 words and make entire wings of the palace stop breathing. I took a careful step back. Then another. Well, I said weakly. Duty calls. Rowan looked at me. Not at the attendant. Not at the tray. At me. The room suddenly felt too small. Then he said very evenly, "You can refuse." I stared at him. I can what? Refuse. I almost laughed in his face. Your brother is the crown prince. And I'm a guard with approximately the same social standing as decorative furniture. Rowan's eyes darkened. You are not furniture. That should not have done anything to me. It did something anyway. Before I could answer, the attendant spoke again, voice shaky. His Royal Highness said, if Guard Edrin delayed, he would come personally. I went cold. Then Rowan stood up. Just stood up. That was all. But suddenly the air in the room got sharper. More dangerous. Let him try, Rowan said. I stared at him. The attendant stared at him. The entire room stared at him. And then, from the doorway behind the attendant, a smooth, familiar voice said, I was wondering how long it would take before you became difficult. Every living soul in the room froze. Caelan stood in the doorway in dark royal robes, hands folded behind his back, looking perfectly composed and completely inhuman. No one had heard him arrive. That was worse than if he had kicked the door open. His gaze slid over the room once. The tray. The used bandages. Rowan shirtless. Then me. Standing in the middle of it all like the least qualified hostage in history. A strange silence followed. Then Caelan smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. The kind of smile a man wore right before someone disappeared from court records. How touching, he said. Rowan didn't move. You entered my chambers without invitation. Caelan's eyes remained on me. And yet I was still invited more warmly than you. I did not know whether to faint, run, or ask the palace gods to strike me down before this turned into a murder scene. Probably all three. Caelan stepped fully into the room. Guard Edrin. His voice softened just enough to be worse. Come here. I did not move. Because I was not stupid. I was only stupid in survivable ways. Unfortunately, both brothers noticed. Rowan's mouth curved faintly like he approved. Caelan's expression didn't change at all. That was somehow more terrifying. Then Ciri, that unholy little menace, chimed again. Special mission triggered. Diffuse sibling hostility. Subobjective. Prevent either prince from drawing a weapon. Reward. Survival probability plus 3%. I stared into the middle distance. 3%. 3%. That was the confidence level this cursed universe had in me? I wanted to cry. Instead, I looked at Rowan. Then at Caelan. Then at the visible tension humming between them like a drawn bowstring. And with the calm of a man stepping barefoot into a battlefield, I said the first thing that came into my head. Would either of you like tea? Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Then Rowan made a sound. A short one. Low in his throat. For one dizzy second, I thought he was about to kill me. Then I realized. He was laughing. Actually laughing. Very softly, but enough to make the entire room feel wrong. Caelan stared at him in visible disbelief. I stared too. Because apparently the second prince did, in fact, have another mood besides murder. It was deeply upsetting. Rowan looked at me with something dangerously close to amusement. Caelan looked at me like I had just become even more interesting than before, which was the opposite of what I wanted. Then the crown prince tilted his head slightly and said, almost gently, Come with me, Edrin. That tone was a trap. A velvet-covered trap. I knew it. My instincts knew it. My rapidly declining will to live definitely knew it. But Rowan's gaze was still on me. Sharp. Quiet. Possessive in a way I did not have the mental stability to unpack. And Caelan was waiting. The crown prince of a kingdom built on fear. The man who, in the original story, smiled while sentencing people to death. And for some reason, for some terrifying, impossible reason, both brothers were watching me like my answer mattered. I swallowed hard, then stepped forward. And the moment I did, I felt it. Not relief. Not safety. Something worse. The invisible click of a trap closing. Because whatever game this was, whatever secret lay buried beneath this palace, this story, this system, and those two impossible men, I had just walked deeper into it. And this time, I wasn't sure I'd be allowed back out. The walk to Crown Prince Caelan's chambers felt exactly like what I imagined walking to my execution would feel like. Quiet. Elegant. Overly expensive. And full of people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. The palace corridor stretched long and polished beneath my boots, lined with carved pillars and hanging silk lanterns. Every servant we passed lowered their heads so quickly it was almost violent. No one spoke. Not the attendants leading the way. Not the guards stationed outside each archway. Not me, because my survival instincts had finally crawled out of their grave and were screaming at full volume. Behind me, I could still feel Rowan's gaze like a knife pressed between my shoulder blades. That was somehow worse than if he had physically followed. Though judging by the tension in the room when I left, he might still decide to. I should have been relieved to be away from him. I wasn't, because now I was being delivered straight to the other problem. The prettier problem. The more intelligent problem. The one who looked at people like he already knew which of their secrets would hurt most. Crown Prince Caelan. I hated that my heartbeat changed when I thought his name. Not in a romantic way. In the way prey probably felt when it noticed the wolf had started walking beside it instead of chasing from a distance. A servant slid open a set of lacquered black doors and bowed low. "Guard Edrin has arrived, Your Highness." "Leave us," came Caelan's voice from inside. Of course. Naturally. Why have witnesses when psychological warfare was more effective in private? The servants withdrew at once. The doors slid shut behind me with a sound far too final for my comfort. I stood still for half a second and took in the room. Caelan's chambers were nothing like Rowan's. Rowan's space felt used, scarred, practical, full of steel and impact. Caelan's looked untouched. Beautiful. Ordered. Controlled. Dark wood shelves lined with books. A low writing desk near the window. A carved screen painted with cranes. Incense curling in pale ribbons through shafts of morning light. And there he was. Crown Prince Caelan sat at the low desk near the window, dressed in black and silver robes that made him look less like a prince and more like a very expensive omen. His sleeves were immaculate. His posture was perfect. His face was unreadable. The only thing human about him was the way his fingers paused very slightly over the document in front of him when I stepped closer. Then he looked up, and I made the terrible mistake of meeting his eyes directly. Calm. Cold. Focused. Not a single drop of warmth in them. And yet I still felt seen in a way that made my pulse trip over itself. "Guard Edrin," he said. His voice was smooth enough to hide knives in. "Your Highness." I bowed. Not too low. Not too slow. Just enough to be respectful without looking like I was about to collapse. Caelan watched me in silence long enough for me to start regretting every decision that had led to my existence. Then he said, "Lift your head." I obeyed. He leaned back slightly. "I have been told," he said, "that you have become rather comfortable in my brother's chambers." I stared at him. There it was. The trap. He'd laid it out in velvet, and now expected me to walk into it politely. I was delivering medicine, Your Highness. And personally rewrapping his bandages? His tone remained mild. That somehow made it worse. I clasped my hands behind my back before they could betray me by fidgeting. He reopened his wound. "And you felt compelled to help." I did not like the way he said that. It sounded less like a question and more like an accusation wrapped in curiosity. So I answered carefully. It seemed unwise to let a prince bleed out over stubbornness. Something shifted in his expression. Small. Brief. Then gone. "Unwise," he repeated softly. He rose to his feet. I immediately regretted how close I was standing. Caelan wasn't as physically intimidating as Rowan in the obvious sense. Rowan looked like he could break bones for sport. Caelan looked like he could smile while arranging your funeral and still make you thank him for the flowers. He crossed the room slowly. Unhurried. Controlled. And stopped directly in front of me. Too close. Far too close. I kept my face neutral through sheer spiritual violence. His gaze moved over me once, measured and precise. Then he reached out. I nearly flinched. His fingers brushed my sleeve. Just once. A tiny, smooth movement. Then he held up a faint red smear on the edge of his thumb. Blood. Rowan's blood. Still on my cuff. My entire body locked. Caelan looked at the stain. Then at me. Then, in that same soft voice, he asked, "Should I be jealous?" My brain disconnected from my body. "I'm sorry, what?" I stared at him so hard I forgot language. He watched me without blinking. And I realized, with the sinking horror of a man trapped in a burning house, that he wasn't joking. Or maybe he was. But if so, it was the kind of joke that usually ended with someone buried under palace stone. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Then, because apparently humiliation was my divine destiny, I said, "That feels like a dangerous question, Your Highness." For one long second, he simply looked at me. Then the corner of his mouth lifted. A smile. A real one this time. Small. Sharp. Beautiful enough to be illegal. And infinitely more frightening than his blank face. "You're smarter than I expected," he murmured. That should not have sounded like a warning. It did. I took one careful step backward. Caelan noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. His gaze lowered briefly to the distance I had created between us. Then lifted again. "You saved Rowan yesterday," he said. The room changed. Just like that. The teasing edge vanished. Something quieter replaced it. "He would have been fine," I said. "That is not what I asked." I swallowed. "No, it wasn't. I looked away first. I saw him falling," I said carefully. So I moved. Caelan was silent. The kind of silence that made me aware of my own breathing. Then he asked, "And if it had been me?" I looked back at him. His expression was impossible to read. Not cold. Not warm. Just waiting. Like the answer mattered far more than it should have. I should have lied. I should have said something vague and obedient and politically safe. Instead, the truth came out before I could stop it. I would have moved too. The air in the room shifted. Caelan didn't speak. Didn't blink. Didn't move. He just looked at me with that same unbearable stillness until I started wondering if I had accidentally detonated something invisible. Then he turned away. Just turned, as if he had not asked a question capable of rearranging my entire emotional stability. "You will accompany me to the royal banquet tonight," he said. I stared at his back. "I will what?" He moved toward the desk and lifted a folded invitation scroll. "The court will gather tonight to celebrate the Western Trade Alliance." That sounded fake. Or at least deeply suspicious. Every banquet in fiction was just politics in expensive clothing. And in a Tyrant novel? A banquet was never a banquet. It was a murder venue with better lighting. "I'm only a guard," I said cautiously. Caelan glanced over his shoulder. "Yes. Then why would I attend?" "Because I said so." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. Of course that was the answer. And before I could think of a less suicidal objection, Siri chimed in my skull like she had been waiting for this exact moment to ruin me. Main story event unlocked: attend the royal banquet with Crown Prince Caelan. Objective: prevent political destabilization. Hidden risk: high reward. Progress toward return route. I went cold. Prevent political destabilization? That was not a normal sentence. That was a sentence that meant someone was about to die in silk. I looked up too quickly. Caelan noticed that too. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "What is it?" "Nothing." "A lie." That made two brothers in one day accusing me of dishonesty. I was exhausted. I pressed my lips together, then said the most truthful lie available. "I don't like banquets." Caelan studied me for another beat, then said, "Neither do I." I blinked. That was not the answer I expected. For one strange moment, something almost human crossed his face. Not softness. Not exactly. Just weariness. A flicker of it. Then it was gone. He placed the invitation scroll back on the desk. "Wear something appropriate," he said. "I'm a guard. You are also under my direct summons." "That sounds expensive." His mouth twitched. Again with that tiny almost smile. It was deeply unfair that someone so emotionally hazardous was allowed to look like that. "You will survive," he said. I wasn't convinced. But before I could argue, a sharp knock sounded at the outer doors. Caelan's expression cooled instantly. "Enter." A palace attendant stepped inside, bent low, and spoke quickly. "Your Highness, Minister Havel requests an urgent audience." Caelan's face didn't change, but something in the room did. Pressure. A tightening, like a thread had just been pulled too hard. "Denied," Caelan said. The attendant hesitated, then swallowed. "Minister Havel says the matter concerns tonight's seating arrangement." That was somehow even more suspicious. Caelan's gaze turned colder. "I see." He looked at me then. Just once. And in that glance, I understood something I probably should not have understood at all. This wasn't about chairs. This was about factions. Positioning. Visibility. Who sat close enough to be seen. Who sat close enough to strike. Caelan dismissed the attendant with a slight motion of his hand. When the doors closed again, he said quietly, "Do not eat or drink anything at the banquet unless I tell you it is safe." I slid down my spine. There it was. Confirmation. I wasn't being paranoid. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I stared at him. "Is someone planning to poison you?" Caelan tilted his head slightly. "Would that surprise you?" "No. Not even a little." Which was maybe the worst part. He watched my expression, then added, "It would be unwise to speak of such things aloud." "You just spoke of it aloud. With you." The room went still. My pulse did something profoundly unhelpful. That was not a romantic line. It was not. It was also somehow worse than a romantic line, because it sounded like trust. And I had no idea what to do with that. Caelan took a step toward me again. This time slower. More deliberate. "Stay close to me tonight, Edrin." My name in his mouth should not have sounded like a hand closing around my throat. It did. Not painfully. Just possessively. Like he had already decided where I belonged. I forced myself to answer evenly. "As you command, Your Highness." His gaze held mine for 1 second too long. Then he said, almost under his breath, "That is not the answer I wanted." Before I could recover from that emotional crime, he turned away and dismissed me. I left his chambers feeling exactly like I had survived something I didn't understand. And I hated that part of me already wanted to understand it. By sunset, the palace had transformed into a polished lie. Lanterns glowed in every corridor. Musicians tuned strings somewhere beyond the banquet hall. Servants moved in elegant waves carrying trays of wine, lacquered dishes, folded silk, and enough political tension to kill a horse. I stood in a side chamber wearing clothes that were absolutely not made for just a guard. Dark formal robes. Silver trim. Hair tied back properly. A sword at my waist polished until it reflected candlelight. I looked like a suspiciously decorative bodyguard. Which, unfortunately, was probably accurate. A servant adjusted the last fold of my sleeve and stepped back with wide eyes. I ignored that, because I was too busy ignoring the knot in my stomach. Siri appeared again. Main story event commencing in 10 minutes. Can you, for once in your miserable existence, say something comforting? Statistically, tonight has a 37% chance of bloodshed. I stared ahead blankly. I preferred silence. You are welcome. The door behind me opened. I turned, and forgot how breathing worked. Caelan stood in the doorway in formal black robes embroidered with silver dragons at the cuffs and collar. His hair was bound neatly, his crown light but unmistakable. He looked exactly like the kind of man who could ruin a kingdom and still be praised for elegance. His gaze landed on me, then paused. Actually paused. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then he said quietly, "Come here." My feet moved before my pride could stop them. He reached up and adjusted the collar of my robe with 2 calm fingers. Just that. Nothing more. A simple gesture. Yet my pulse immediately became a traitor. "This was folded incorrectly," he said. "Oh, brilliant response. Incredible. My ancestors were surely proud." Caelan's fingers lingered 1 second too long at the edge of my collar. Then he withdrew. "There," he said. "You are presentable." "Thank you," I muttered. He looked faintly amused. And then we walked into the banquet hall together. The effect was immediate. Conversation didn't stop. That would have been too obvious. But it changed. Bent. Tilted. Like every eye in the room had shifted without permission. The hall itself was blinding. Gold pillars, red silk banners, long banquet tables gleaming with crystal and silver. Nobles in layered robes smiled too easily. Ministers bowed too deeply. Ladies behind embroidered fans watched everything with terrifying precision. At the far end of the hall, Rowan was already there. Of course he was. Seated lower than Caelan, but no less dangerous for it, dressed in dark crimson formal, where that somehow made him look even more like a threat carved into human shape. His eyes found me instantly, then shifted to Caelan beside me, then to the distance between us. His expression darkened. Wonderful. Fantastic. I had become the human center of a political and emotional disaster. Exactly where I wanted to be. Caelan moved to his seat at the head table. I took my position 1 step behind and slightly to the side, just as a guard should. I told myself to stay calm. Stay alert. Watch the wine. Watch the servants. Watch the exits. Then the banquet began. Music. Toasts. Performative laughter. And beneath it all, a current of something sharp and hidden moving through the room. I saw it in the way certain ministers leaned too close together. In the way one servant kept glancing toward the head table. In the way Rowan had not looked away from the central aisle once. Something was coming. I could feel it. Then the first cups of wine were poured. A servant approached Caelan's side with a jade bottle and a perfect bow. My stomach dropped instantly. No reason. No proof. Just instinct. Maybe because his hand shook too much. Maybe because he wouldn't lift his eyes. Maybe because every survival nerve in my body suddenly screamed. The servant tipped the bottle. Dark red wine began to pour into Caelan's cup. And before I could think, I moved. My hand shot out. I slammed the cup sideways. It hit the floor and shattered. Red liquid splashed across white stone like fresh blood. The entire banquet hall fell silent. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. The servant went white. Caelan did not move. Not even a little. I stared at the spreading wine on the floor, chest heaving, my own pulse hammering so violently it hurt. And then, in the dead center of that silence, Rowan rose to his feet. Slowly. Terrifyingly. Like death itself had just decided to stand. Caelan finally looked at me. Not at the servant. Not at the broken cup. At me. And in a voice so soft it chilled me to the bone, he asked, "Edrin, what did you just save me from?" For one impossible second, no one in the banquet hall moved. Not the nobles. Not the servants. Not the musicians. Not even the man who had just tried to poison the crown prince. The broken cup glittered across the polished white floor between us, dark wine spreading through the cracks like blood searching for a body. My body, apparently, because every eye in the hall had landed on me like I was the one who had committed the crime. I stood frozen beside Caelan's chair with my hand still half raised from knocking the cup away. My pulse slammed hard enough to blur the edges of my vision. Then Rowan stepped down from his seat. One step. That was all. But the room changed. The nobles nearest him visibly recoiled. The servant who had poured the wine dropped to his knees, so fast his forehead nearly hit the floor. And suddenly I understood why the original novel kept describing the brothers as tyrants and monsters and curses in human skin. It wasn't just power. It was presence. The way the air itself seemed to tense around them. The way fear spread faster than sound. Caelan remained seated. That was somehow worse. He looked at the shattered cup for one quiet second, then lifted his gaze to the kneeling servant. "Explain," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The servant began shaking so hard I could hear his sleeves rustle. "Why, Your Highness, I don't know, I swear. I was only following." "Following who?" Rowan asked. The man made a strangled sound. No one answered Rowan with silence and survived long. I knew that. Apparently, so did he. The servant's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish dragged onto dry land. And then, he convulsed. Once. Sharply. His body seized, eyes rolling back, foam gathering at the edge of his lips. The hall erupted. Someone screamed. A noble woman dropped her fan. A chair scraped harshly across stone. The servant collapsed sideways, twitching violently on the floor. Poison. Not the wine. Him. I staggered back a half step before I could stop myself. "Everyone remain seated," Caelan said. The command cut clean through the panic. It should not have worked so quickly. It did. The room obeyed him instantly. Even fear had hierarchy here. Rowan crouched beside the fallen servant, checked his pulse with 2 fingers, then rose again with complete lack of surprise. "Dead," he said. The word hit the hall like a blade. A dead servant. A poison cup. A failed attempt on the crown prince. And me, idiot accidental disaster magnet, deeply unqualified fool, standing in the center of it. Caelan turned his head and looked at me. Not shocked. Not angry. Just searching. His gaze slid over my face like he was reading for damage. "Are you hurt?" The question hit me so strangely I almost forgot how to answer. "I know." He held my eyes for 1 second too long. Then, in the same calm tone he might have used to request tea, he said, "Good. Good. Not how did you know? Not explain yourself. Not even why did you interfere. Just good." Something twisted low in my chest. Then Siri chose that exact moment to chirp inside my skull like a smug little demon. Main story event success. Poison attempt avoided, crown prince survival route stabilized, reward. Progress increased. I went still. Stabilized? That word lodged itself under my ribs. Because if the route could be stabilized, that meant it had already been destabilized. This wasn't just random palace politics. This was part of something already in motion. And Siri sounded far too pleased about it. Caelan rose to his feet. The entire hall dropped its gaze. His expression was unreadable. Beautiful. Cold. The kind of face people prayed toward and died under. "This banquet is concluded," he said. No one argued. No one even breathed too loudly. "Minister Havel," he continued, eyes shifting toward a heavy-set older man halfway down the table. "You will remain." The minister went pale. "Why, Your Highness, I..." Remain, Caelan repeated. The minister shut his mouth instantly. Caelan then looked at me. Edrin. Come. That was all. Just my name and a command. And still every nerve in my body reacted like he had touched me. I hated that for me. The moment we were out of the banquet hall and into the private corridor behind it, Rowan caught up to us. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He simply appeared at my side like a blade stepping out of shadow. I flinched anyway. Rowan's eyes cut straight to my face. What did you see? No greeting. No easing in. Just straight to interrogation. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because what was I supposed to say? Your brother's wine looked murdery? Caelan stopped walking and turned to face me fully. The corridor was dim and empty, lit only by wall lanterns and moonlight leaking through carved windows. Outside, I could hear distant palace movement, guards, servants, whispers carrying news like infection. Inside the corridor, there was only the three of us. And tension so thick it had texture. Caelan's voice dropped. Tell me the truth. That should not have felt as dangerous as it did. But it did, because the truth was impossible. And lies were getting harder to carry. I swallowed. I noticed the servant's hand shaking. I said carefully. That part, at least, was true. And I looked between them. Caelan was unreadable. Rowan was not. Rowan looked like he was one wrong answer away from dragging the entire palace apart stone by stone. And I had a bad feeling. I finished. Silence. Rowan stared at me. Caelan stared at me. I stared at the middle distance and considered faking my death a second time. Then Rowan said flatly, That's not enough. I know. Then what aren't you saying? Everything, actually. A great many things. Like how your invisible mission parasite keeps dropping me into near-death court events. Like how both of you keep acting like I'm a dead man returned from your unresolved trauma. Like how I'm beginning to think none of this story is working the way it should. I took a breath. Then another. And before I could decide whether self-preservation or honesty was more useful, Ciri's voice slid into my mind. Emergency mission available. Absolutely not. No. I refused. The panel appeared anyway. Emergency mission, comfort Prince Rowan after high-risk combat, stress comfort Crown Prince Caelan after assassination attempt reward. Route stability failure penalty, emotional divergence. I stared into nothing. Comfort them? Right now? After attempted murder? What was wrong with this system? No, more importantly, what was wrong with this world? Because the system kept treating emotional intimacy like political strategy. Again and again. Touch this one. Stay near that one. Soothe him. Calm him. Increase affection. Stabilize route. It was too consistent to ignore. And suddenly, sharply, horribly, a thought clicked into place. I looked up. Not at the brothers. At Ciri's floating panel still hanging in the corner of my vision. The wording. The patterns. The missions. The way it always pushed me toward them. Not the throne. Not war plans. Not military influence. Them. Not power. Attachment. My blood ran cold. No. No, that couldn't be right. Could it? I must have gone pale, because Caelan stepped forward instantly. Edrin. His hand came up like he meant to touch me, then stopped just short of my arm. That somehow felt more dangerous than if he had actually touched me. What happened? I looked at him. Then at Rowan. Then back at the panel only I could see. And something deep inside me, something exhausted and frightened and finally angry, began to shake loose. This system was lying. I didn't know how much. I didn't know why. But I knew it. And once I knew it, I couldn't unknow it. I need to go, I said. Rowan's expression hardened immediately. No. I blinked. I'm not asking permission. You're not leaving alone tonight. I'm not planning to die, Rowan. You weren't planning to almost die tonight either. That shut me up. Caelan watched both of us in silence, then said, He's right. I turned to him. You can't both say he's right. That's deeply unhelpful. A pause. Then, to my absolute disbelief, Rowan's mouth twitched. Caelan's did too. Only slightly. Only briefly. But enough. Enough to make me feel like I had slipped sideways into a stranger, more dangerous version of reality. I pressed a hand to my forehead. This is a nightmare. No, Rowan said quietly. His eyes were on me. Too steady. Too intense. This is you still being alive. That should not have sounded intimate. It did anyway. I hated all of this. Take him to the East residence, Caelan said. I looked up sharply. What? It is closer to both our quarters and easier to secure. I already have a room. You had a room, Caelan corrected calmly. Before someone tried to poison me in public with you standing at my side. That seems unfairly connected. It is connected now. That was annoyingly true. Because if the wrong people believed I had saved the crown prince intentionally, or if the right people believed it, then I had just painted a target on my own back large enough to be seen from orbit. I hated when tyrants made sense. I don't need to move, I said weakly. Rowan looked at me like I had said something clinically stupid. You do. Caelan's gaze remained on my face. Tonight, he said softly, you stay where we can protect you. The words should have reassured me. Instead, they lodged somewhere behind my ribs and stayed there, warm and heavy and impossible to ignore. Because no one had said things like that to me in a very long time. Not since. No. I shoved that thought down before it could open old wounds. Fine, I muttered. But only for tonight. Neither of them answered, which somehow felt like losing. The East residence turned out to be less guest room and more elegant political hostage suite. The chamber was spacious, warm, and positioned between the wings used by both princes. Too close to be accidental. Too convenient to be safe. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had been strategically relocated. The servants withdrew after setting down tea and fresh candles. The door closed. And finally, blessedly, I was alone. For all of 3 seconds. Then Siri popped up in front of me. I spun around so violently I almost knocked over the tea tray. You little parasite, I hissed. Host seems emotionally unstable. You tried to send me into a murder banquet. Correction. Host successfully prevented an undesirable branch. I stared at her glowing interface. Then said slowly, what branch? Silence. That alone was enough to make my stomach turn. I stepped closer. What branch, Siri? Mission confidentiality remains active. My laugh came out thin and ugly. Mission confidentiality? The panel flickered. I took another step. You told me I needed to make Caelan king and Rowan a general. Correct. But every mission you give me has nothing to do with politics. No response. I pointed at the glowing text hard enough to almost jab through it. You don't ask me to gather allies, or manage court factions, or influence military appointments. You ask me to touch them, stay near them, comfort them, increase affection. The panel remained very still. Too still. And suddenly I knew. Not the whole truth, but enough to make me feel sick. My voice came out quieter this time. This mission was never really mine, was it? Nothing. Then, the panel glitched. Just once. A sharp flicker across the gold light. And in that tiny fractured second, new text flashed across the screen so quickly I almost missed it. Original host link, unresolved, primary targets, Caelan/Rowan, route correction in progress. I stopped breathing. No. The room tilted. Primary targets? Not mission beneficiaries. Targets. And not me. Them. My hands went cold. What is this? Display error. That was not a display error. Please remain calm, host. Don't tell me to remain calm when you've been lying to me since day one. The panel flickered again, then returned to its usual cheerful brightness like nothing had happened. I wanted to strangle it. If it had a neck, I would have. I staggered back one step and sat heavily on the edge of the bed before my legs gave out entirely. The truth settled slowly. Not all at once. In pieces. Like ice cracking across dark water. The missions weren't built for me. The emotional route wasn't centered on me. I was just a substitute. A patch. A convenient piece moved into place when the original game refused to progress. And if that was true, then why me? Why had I been brought here at all? Why had I woken up in this body, in this story, in the exact path of two men who looked at me like I had once belonged to them? A knock sounded at the door. I went rigid. Who is it? Me, Caelan said from the other side. Of course. Because apparently private breakdowns were no longer available to me. I dragged a hand over my face and forced my voice steady. Come in. The door opened. Caelan stepped inside carrying a folded dark cloak over one arm. He stopped the moment he looked at me. Whatever he saw in my face erased the neutrality from his expression instantly. He shut the door behind him, then crossed the room without a word. Edrin. I laughed once under my breath. It sounded tired and wrong. You know, I said, staring at the floor, I'm starting to think I may not actually be the main character of my own problems. Caelan was quiet. Then very softly. No. I looked up. He was standing in front of me now. Too close. Again. Always too close. His gaze held mine. And this time there was no teasing in it. No politics. No manipulation I could see. Only something heavier. Something old. Something that made my chest tighten before he even spoke. "You never were," he said. The room went silent. My pulse stopped. Just for a second. Then slammed back twice as hard. Because the way he said it, not cruel, not dismissive, just certain, like he knew something I didn't. Like he had been standing at the edge of this truth for much longer than I had. A chill moved down my spine. "What does that mean?" I asked. Caelan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched in front of me so our eyes were level. It was such an absurdly intimate position for a crown prince that my brain nearly short-circuited. But his expression stayed grave. Focused. And when he finally spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. "It means," he said, "that the story began long before you opened your eyes in this world." My mouth went dry. Outside, somewhere deep in the palace, the midnight bell rang. And inside that quiet room, with the system still flickering in the corner of my vision and Caelan kneeling in front of me like a man about to open a grave, I realized I had just stepped into the truth. And whatever waited inside it was going to ruin me. The midnight bell finished echoing through the palace. One strike, then another, then silence. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at Crown Prince Caelan like my body had forgotten how to move and my mind had forgotten how to survive. He was still crouched in front of me. Still too close. Still looking at me with the kind of quiet that always came before something irreversible. The room felt smaller than before. The candlelight softer. The air heavier. And Siri, for once, was silent. That frightened me more than anything. Because if even the system had shut up, then whatever came next was bad enough to make an invisible parasite nervous. I swallowed. Hard. Then asked the only question that mattered. "What do you mean?" I said carefully. "The story began before I got here." Caelan did not answer immediately. Of course he didn't. He was the kind of man who could turn a simple conversation into a controlled demolition. Instead, he held my gaze for one unbearable second, then rose smoothly to his feet. He moved to the low table by the window and poured tea into 2 cups, as if he had not just shattered my last remaining illusion of normalcy. I stared at his back, then at the tea, then back at him. You can't say something that horrifying and then make tea. He glanced at me over his shoulder. "I can," he said calmly. "I just did." I stared at him flatly. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he picked up one of the cups and handed it to me. His fingers brushed mine for less than a second. It still felt like a mistake. I took the tea because I needed something to hold that wasn't my rapidly collapsing emotional stability. Caelan sat across from me on the edge of the long cushioned bench near the bed. The distance should have helped. It didn't, because he still looked like a man carrying a knife under his ribs and deciding whether to show me the wound. I hated that I was waiting for him to. Then he said quietly, "You are not the only one who came from another world." Everything in me went still. My fingers tightened around the teacup. No, I had guessed something was wrong, yes. But not that. I stared at him, then laughed once. A tiny broken sound. No, Caelan did not blink. That is not a joke. I looked at him harder. His face did not change. Not even a little. And slowly, horribly, the truth began to drag itself into shape. The way Rowan had said my name in the training yard. The way Caelan had looked at me at the banquet. The way both of them watched me like recognition hurt. My throat tightened. "You." My voice nearly failed. I tried again. "You're saying you remember another life?" "Yes." My pulse started slamming so hard it made my hands shake. "Who?" His answer came without hesitation. "Me." One beat. Then. "And Rowan." The teacup nearly slipped from my hand. I set it down before I dropped it and burned us both. The room tilted. Not literally. But enough. Because this was impossible. No, worse. This explained too much. I stood up abruptly and took 2 steps back before I could stop myself. "This is insane." Caelan watched me. "It is." "No, I mean actually insane." "Yes." "You and Rowan are saying you both, what? Transmigrated too." "Yes." "You both came from my world?" "Yes." "You both remember me?" At that, something changed in his face. Small. Painfully small. But enough. Enough to make my chest hurt before he even answered. "Yes." The word hit me like a blow. I turned away from him instantly, because I couldn't stand there and let him see my face while everything inside me came apart. my palms pressed flat against the carved wooden bedpost. Cold. Solid. Real. I focused on that. Not on my pulse. Not on the way my breathing had gone shallow. Not on the memory trying to crawl up from somewhere old and neglected. A school hallway. Rainy weather. A cheap lunchbox in my hands. 2 boys sitting alone by the back stairs. No. No, that couldn't. Edrin. Caelan's voice was softer now. Careful. As if I might shatter. I hated that too. Don't, I said quietly. He stopped. Good. Because if he said my name one more time like that, I might actually lose what was left of my mind. I kept my back to him and said, start from the beginning. A pause. Then Caelan spoke. And with every word, the floor under my life cracked wider. 10 years earlier, their original world. We were brothers there too, Caelan said. His voice was even. Controlled. Too controlled. The kind of control people used when they were holding something ugly together with their bare hands. Our family was wealthy. Visible. Useful. The kind of family people bowed to in public and devoured in private. I shut my eyes. I could hear him behind me. Could picture him even without looking. Still, elegant, composed, while telling me something that clearly lived much closer to bone than he wanted it to. Rowan was younger, he continued. Violent. Angry. Easy to provoke. That sounded about right. I was quieter. More useful. Better at pretending things did not affect me. That also sounded about right. My fingers curled slightly against the bedpost. And you? I asked. His answer came so fast it almost sounded like instinct. You were kind. My throat tightened. I hated how quickly that hurt. He continued before I could respond. You sat 2 rows ahead of me in class for nearly a year before you spoke to us. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. Then restarted so violently it made my chest ache. No. No, no. I turned around. Too fast. My eyes locked onto his. And just like that, the memory hit. Not all at once. In flashes. A school lunch break. Whispers. Expensive watches hidden under uniform sleeves. Bruises Rowan used to pretend weren't there. Caelan sitting too straight, too quiet, too self-contained for a boy his age. And me. Stupid, nosy, soft-hearted me. Standing in front of them with my lunchbox and saying the dumbest thing I had ever said in my life. Do you guys not have enough food? I slapped a hand over my mouth. Caelan looked at me. Then, to my complete horror, his expression softened. Only a little. But enough. You remember. I stared at him in disbelief. Oh my God. Not because of the transmigration. Not because of the world hopping. Not because of the cursed palace. No. Worse. Much worse. I thought you were poor. The words escaped before I could stop them. The room went silent. Caelan blinked once. Then twice. And for the first time since I had entered this world, the crown prince of a blood-soaked empire actually looked caught off guard. Then, from the doorway behind us, Rowan's voice cut in like a blade. You did. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. Prince Rowan stood in the open doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Of course he had heard that. Of course he had. Because my life was a humiliating comedy written by a sadist. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. His dark eyes stayed on me. You thought we were poor, he repeated. I stared back at him, heat flooding straight into my face. You looked poor. Caelan made a soft sound behind me. I whipped around. He was covering his mouth. His shoulders had moved. No. No, absolutely not. I pointed at him in outrage. Are you laughing? No, he said immediately. He was. He absolutely was. I turned to Rowan, scandalized. He's laughing. He used to do that in high school too, Rowan said. My outrage faltered. I looked at him. He looked back at me with that same cold, steady expression. Then added, quieter this time. You were the only one who never looked at us like our family name meant anything. The room went still again. Not funny this time. Not embarrassing. Just still. I lowered my hand slowly. Rowan moved closer. Not too close. But enough to make the space between us feel charged. You looked at my bruises, he said. At his dark circles. At the fact that we never ate with anyone else. His voice remained flat. But something under it wasn't. Something older. Rougher. You thought we were struggling, he finished. I swallowed. I was wrong. Yes. A beat. Then. But you still gave us your lunch. And there it was. The thing I hadn't remembered until now. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was important. but because at the time it had felt ordinary. I used to pack too much food. Always. Because when my sister was still alive, she had a bad habit of overfeeding everyone she loved. After she died, I kept doing it without realizing why. I made extra rice, extra side dishes, extra cut fruit. And after I noticed the two rich, emotionally constipated brothers sitting alone every lunch break, looking like they were one inconvenience away from committing arson, I started bringing more. I never thought much of it. I would set the lunchbox down between them and say stupid things like, "I made too much. It'll go bad if you don't eat it. Stop pretending you're not hungry." And apparently, that had ruined all three of our lives. I sat down slowly on the bed because my knees had become unreliable. "That's insane," I muttered. Rowan came to stand in front of me. Caelan stayed by the table. And for one strange, surreal moment, it felt exactly like I was back there again. A classroom after school. Two boys watching me too closely. Me pretending not to notice because I had too much homework and not enough emotional range. Only now they were no longer boys. And I was trapped in a historical death novel. Which frankly felt rude. "You loved me because I fed you lunch?" I asked weakly. "No," Caelan said. I looked up. He was watching me with that same quiet, devastating focus. "We loved you because you were kind to us when no one else was." My chest tightened painfully. Caelan continued. "Everyone around us knew who we were. What our family had. What they could gain." His voice stayed calm. Too calm. "But you looked at us and saw two boys who seemed lonely." A pause. Then, almost too quietly to hear. "You were the first person who treated us like we were worth caring for before we were worth using." That one went straight through me. No defense. No warning. Just impact. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. I curled them into fists so neither of them would see. Too late. They always saw too much. "I didn't know," I said. And that was the worst part. I hadn't known. Not then. Not now. Not until they dragged the truth out and laid it between us like a blade. "I know," Rowan said. His voice had gone lower. Softer. And somehow that was harder to survive than when he sounded dangerous. That's why it stayed real. I looked up at him. He was so close now. Close enough that I could see the faint scar near his jaw. Close enough to remember another version of him with a split lip and a scowl, refusing to admit he liked the tamagoyki I packed on Wednesdays. Something in me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to let grief through. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked. That question was not fair. Not to them. Not to me. Not to the years we had already lost. But it still came out. Caelan answered first. "Because you died." The room went silent. I stopped breathing. Caelan's expression didn't change. But his hands did. I noticed it then. The way his fingers had curled slightly at his side. Tight. Controlled. Painfully controlled. His gaze remained on me. "We were too late," he said. Every word landed clean and merciless. "By the time we found the courage to say anything, you were gone." I stared at him. Then at Rowan. And for the first time since waking up in this world, I understood something with complete and terrible clarity. They had not fallen for me here. They had not become obsessed with me because of missions or systems or palace politics. They had come into this world already carrying me. Already haunted. Already in love. And I had walked into their second chance wearing someone else's body and still managed not to understand what I was looking at. My eyes burned. Absolutely not. No, I refused. I was not going to cry in front of two terrifyingly attractive tyrants because of lunchbox trauma. That was beneath me. Unfortunately, my tear ducts did not respect my dignity. I blinked hard. Once. Then again. Too late. A tear slipped loose anyway. I swore under my breath and turned my face away sharply. "Wonderful," I muttered. "Fantastic. Love that for me." The mattress dipped. Rowan had sat beside me. Too close. Again. I should have moved. I didn't. Caelan stepped forward too. His voice came quieter now. "Edrin." I wiped angrily at my face. "Don't say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like..." I stopped. Because I didn't have the language for it. Like I was something fragile. Like I was something precious. Like losing me had nearly broken them once, and they would not survive a second time. I laughed once, ugly and thin. "You're both unbelievable." "Yes," Rowan said. I looked at him in disbelief. He looked back with complete seriousness. Caelan closed his eyes briefly, like a man reconsidering his attachment to humanity. Then Siri ruined everything. Warning. Host emotional deviation detected, original route interference, escalating punishment protocol available. The panel flashed bright gold in the center of my vision. Then red. My blood ran cold. No. No, absolutely not. What is that? I whispered. Caelan's expression changed instantly. Sharp. Alert. He stepped closer. What happened? The panel glitched again. The letters scrambled. Then reformed. Punishment protocol. Forced correction. Host refusal of route progression detected, apply pain stimulus. Y/N. I froze. For one insane second, I actually stared at the options like a fool. Then the panel chose for itself. Y selected. Pain hit me like a blade driven straight through my spine. I screamed. Actually screamed. My whole body folded in on itself before I could stop it. Teacup shattering somewhere on the floor as agony tore through my chest, my skull, my nerves. Everywhere. Too much. Too sharp. Like my body was being ripped apart from the inside by invisible hooks. I heard someone say my name. No. Not someone. Both of them. At once. Hands caught me before I hit the floor fully. Rowan's arm around my back. Caelan's hand at the side of my neck. The room blurred. My vision swam white. I could hear Siri speaking, but not in words anymore. Just static. Noise. A machine choking on its own lie. Then Rowan's voice cut through it. Cold. Murderous. Terrifyingly clear. What did it do to him? Caelan's grip tightened. His voice came lower than I had ever heard it. It's punishing him. I could barely breathe. Barely think. But even through the pain, one thing landed. Not what's happening to him. Not is he dying. They knew. Not everything. But enough. Enough to recognize this. Enough to fear it. I dragged in one broken breath and forced the words out through clenched teeth. You knew. Caelan looked down at me. And for the first time since I had met him in this world. For the first time, the Crown Prince looked afraid. Not for himself. For me. And somehow that hurt more than the pain. Then Rowan said, in a voice like a vow carved into stone, "Tell us how to kill it." And through the agony, through the terror, through the system trying to tear me apart for learning too much, I realized one final, brutal truth. I had never been their mission. I had been their weakness. And now that they knew I was being used, the entire palace was about to burn. Pain had a sound. I didn't know that before. I thought pain was heat, pressure, sharpness, the body's private scream. But this had sound. A high, ugly ringing buried under my own pulse. A violent static crawling through my skull like broken glass grinding against bone. I couldn't breathe around it. Couldn't think around it. Couldn't even open my eyes properly because every flicker of candlelight stabbed straight through my head. My body had folded in on itself on the floor without my permission. My fingers clawed uselessly at the carpet, at Rowan's sleeve, at anything solid enough to anchor me while invisible hooks tore through my nerves. Somewhere above me, someone was saying my name. No, not someone. Both of them. At once. Edrin. Edrin, look at me. A hand cradled the side of my neck. Another gripped my wrist so tightly I should have hated it. Instead, I clung harder. Because the only thing worse than pain was the fear of falling all the way through it alone. My vision cleared just enough for me to make out Rowan's face above me. Dark eyes. Sharp jaw. No expression. Which was somehow worse than panic. Because Rowan wasn't calm. He was past calm. Past fury. Past anything human enough to show on his face. He looked like violence forced into stillness. And Caelan. Caelan was kneeling on my other side, one hand steady against the back of my neck, the other pressed flat over my chest like he could physically keep my heart from shattering under the pressure. Stay with us, he said. His voice was too low, too controlled. The kind of control men used when they were one wrong breath away from murder. I tried to answer. Only a broken sound came out. Then Siri's voice cut through the room. Bright. Cheerful. Completely wrong. Punishment protocol successfully administered. I froze. Not because the pain stopped. It didn't. But because the sheer, unbelievable cruelty of that voice cut through even agony. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Rowan looked up, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped. Come out, he said. His voice was flat. Quiet. Lethal. The glowing panel flickered uncertainly in the corner of my vision. Prince Rowan does not have system access privileges. Caelan's hand tightened against my chest. Then grant them, he said. The room went still. Siri did not answer immediately. I could hear my own ragged breathing. could feel Rowan's pulse hammering through the hand I still had fisted in his sleeve. And then, for the first time since I had met her, Siri sounded uncertain. Primary host link remains inactive. Everything stopped. Not the pain, not my pulse, but the world around it. Because those words, those specific words, hit the room like a match dropped into dry grass. Rowan's expression didn't change. Caelan's did not either. But something behind both their eyes sharpened with terrible clarity. Caelan looked down at me, then back at the flickering golden panel only I should have been able to see. Except now. Now they were seeing it too. No. Worse. Recognizing it. Rowan's mouth curved. Not kindly. Not humorously. Like a man who had finally found the throat of something he had wanted dead for years. There you are, he said. My breathing caught. Caelan's gaze remained fixed on the system interface. Open, he said. Siri flickered harder. Access denied. Rowan's fingers closed over my hand more tightly. Open, he repeated. Still nothing. The panel glitched. Gold light splintered briefly across the room. And then the air changed. Not with magic. Not with visible force. But with recognition. Like something ancient and mechanical had just realized it was no longer dealing with a substitute. 2 new windows burst open in midair. Not mine. Theirs. Host identification confirmed primary host A. Caelan primary host B. Rowan route status. Delayed correction required. I stared through the haze of pain. No. No. So it was true. It had always been true. The system had never belonged to me. I had just been dragged into its unfinished obsession. Rowan looked at the screen with utter contempt. Caelan looked at it like a man staring at an old enemy. And then, very calmly, Caelan said, "End the punishment. Host Edrin is obstructing route progression." Rowan's laugh came low and cold. "No," he said. "He's the only reason your route still exists." Correction. Host Edrin was selected as an auxiliary catalyst after repeated mission refusal by primary hosts. Auxiliary catalyst. The phrase landed like acid. I think I made some sound. Small. Humiliating. Because there it was. The ugliest truth stripped clean. Not chosen. Not special. Not necessary. Just useful. Caelan's head snapped toward me instantly. And whatever he saw in my face made something in his expression crack. Not completely. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough for me. Enough to make his next words come out colder than winter. "Say another word about him like that," he told the system, "and I will finish what I should have done the first time." Siri glitched violently. The lights in the room flickered with her. I stared at Caelan. "The first time." Before I could ask, Rowan spoke. "Listen carefully," he said to the system. His voice had gone terrifyingly level. The kind of voice soldiers probably heard right before battle lines disappeared. "You wanted us to become king and general. Correct. You wanted us to follow your missions. Correct. You wanted us to stabilize the route. Correct." Rowan leaned forward slightly, eyes black with fury. "Then complete it through us." The room went silent. Even the pain seemed to hesitate. Caelan's hand never left my chest. But his gaze was locked on Siri now too. "And you will leave Edrin out of it," he said. Every word was clean and final. "You will detach from him. You will not issue him another mission. You will not punish him again." The system's light pulsed sharply. "Mission reassignment may destabilize progression." Rowan's expression did not change. "Then let it destabilize." Caelan's tone remained soft enough to be deadly. "No," he said. "It won't." He looked at the panel like he was looking at a weak point in armor. "We will complete your objectives ourselves." My head swam. I forced my eyes open wider. "No." The word came out thin and broken. Rowan looked down at me instantly. "Don't." I swallowed hard through the ache in my throat. "No," I said again, weaker this time. "Don't agree." Because I knew what that meant. Even if they hadn't said it yet. Even if I was dizzy and shaking and half broken on the floor. I knew. The system's route was not just political. It never had been. It wanted power, yes. But it wanted emotional obedience too. Attachment. Dependency. Possession. And if the brothers agreed to complete the mission directly, then they were agreeing to step fully into the roles the system had designed for them. King. General. Monsters if necessary. All without using me as the blade. Caelan's hand slid gently from my chest to the side of my face. Just once. A touch so careful it nearly broke me worse than the pain had. His thumb brushed beneath my eye. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "Look at me," he said. I did. I shouldn't have. But I did. And God, that was a mistake. Because his face was too close. Too beautiful. Too heartbreakingly serious. And his eyes, those impossible, unreadable eyes, held none of the usual distance now. No cold amusement. No political calculation. Just one brutal, unwavering truth. We are not asking you to carry this for us anymore. My throat closed. Rowan shifted closer on my other side. His hand moved from my wrist to the back of my neck, rougher than Caelan's touch, but somehow no less careful. You've done enough, Rowan said. Enough. The word landed somewhere deep and painful. Because no one had ever said that to me before. Not really. Not in any way that meant. You can stop now. You don't have to keep saving everyone by yourself. And suddenly I hated them both a little for saying it now, when I was weak enough to believe it. Siri's voice cut in again, sharper this time. Warning. Primary host compliance must be explicit. Caelan did not look away from me. Then listen carefully. He said it to the system. But he never broke eye contact with me. I will take the throne. Rowan's hand tightened once at the back of my neck. I will take the army. The panel flashed gold. Then red. Then gold again. Conditional reassignment possible. Caelan's voice dropped lower. But if you touch him again, Rowan finished for him. We'll destroy you before the coronation ever happens. The system flickered violently. For the first time, Siri sounded less cheerful. Less smug. Less certain. Threats against mission infrastructure are prohibited. That sounds like your problem, Rowan said. Punishment against auxiliary host will be suspended pending reassignment. Suspended. Not ended. My fingers curled weakly into the carpet. Caelan caught the movement immediately. Not enough, he said. The room sharpened again. His expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that usually came right before history changed. Remove the punishment protocol entirely. The panel froze. That is not authorized. Caelan's voice remained quiet. But making him suffer was? No answer. He took that silence and pressed harder. Detach from him. Auxiliary host remains critical for emotional route calibration. Rowan's laugh this time had no humor in it at all. Emotional route? There was something almost feral in the way he said it. Like the phrase itself offended him. You mean your seduction games? The panel glitched. Badly. Emotional synchronization is essential to route progression. Caelan's expression darkened in a way I had not yet seen from him. Not anger. Not exactly. Something colder. Something personal. So that's what you called it, he said. My head turned weakly toward him. He was still staring at the panel. But now I understood. At least part of it. They had known. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to recognize the pattern of the missions. Enough to know Siri had been trying to manipulate them through me. Enough to hate her for it. And maybe, worse, enough to hate themselves for ever letting it get this far. My body shuddered once, pain finally ebbing from a scream into a deep, shaking ache. Caelan noticed first. Of course he did. His hand returned to my chest, steadying me. Breathe, he said. I dragged in air. It hurt, but less than before. Siri's panel pulsed again. Then slowly, a new line appeared. Provisional System Revision Auxiliary Host, Edrin Punishment Access, Locked Mission Assignment, Suspended Primary Hosts Reinstated Conditions Pending. I went still. Mission Assignment, Suspended. Punishment Access, Locked. For a second, I didn't understand the words. Then I did. And the sheer relief of it was so sudden, so violent, it almost made me sick. No more missions. No more forced touching. No more punishment. At least. For now. My body finally gave up. Not dramatically. Not in some elegant fainting scene. Just collapsed. The last of the tension drained out of me all at once. My shoulders sagged. My head tipped forward. And before I could stop it, my forehead landed against Rowan's shoulder. I froze. Mortified. Absolutely mortified. But too exhausted to move. Rowan didn't move either. Neither did Caelan. For one awful second, I prepared for embarrassment, awkwardness, maybe even my own spontaneous death. Instead, Rowan's hand came up. Slowly, carefully, and settled against the back of my head. Like that was the most natural place in the world for me to be. My breath caught. Caelan exhaled softly through his nose. Then, to my complete lack of emotional preparedness, he brushed a few damp strands of hair back from my face. You're shaking, he said. I'm fine, I lied automatically. No, both of them said at once. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course they would unite specifically to ruin my dignity. I let out a weak, exhausted laugh. It sounded more like surrender than amusement. And maybe it was. Because I was tired. So tired. Of being useful. Of being careful. Of carrying too much and calling it normal. And now here I was, half curled on the floor between two men who had loved me across worlds and were apparently willing to threaten a supernatural system for hurting me. That was not a sentence I had ever expected to live inside. But it was mine now. Just like this life was becoming mine in ways I didn't know how to stop. Caelan looked at the system panel one final time. His expression had gone unreadable again. Controlled. But not empty. Never empty now that I knew what sat underneath. "You will not use him again," he said. It was not a request. Siri flickered weakly. Acknowledged. Rowan's hand remained at the back of my head. Too warm. Too steady. Too dangerous to feel this safe. "Good," he said. And for the first time since I woke in this world. For the first time. The system sounded like the least powerful thing in the room. Later, after the panel vanished and the room finally stopped feeling like a battlefield, I found myself sitting on the bed with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of water in my hands. I had no memory of getting there. 1 second I had been on the floor. The next, I was tucked into the center of the mattress like a deeply traumatized decorative pillow. Caelan stood near the window, arms crossed, gaze turned toward the dark palace courtyard outside. Rowan sat in a chair beside the bed, elbows braced on his knees, watching me like if I blinked wrong he might set the entire East Wing on fire. Neither of them had left. That should have made me nervous. It did. A little. Mostly, though, it made me feel something much more dangerous. Not safety. Something worse. The possibility of it. I hated possibilities. They made people hopeful. And hope was just another way to get hurt slower. Still, my voice came out quiet when I finally asked. "So, you really agreed?" Caelan looked back at me. "Yes. To become king." "Yes." I turned to Rowan. "To become general." "Yes." I gripped the cup tighter. "Because of me?" Rowan frowned immediately. "That's a stupid question." I blinked. "Well, that's rude." "It's still stupid." Caelan's mouth twitched faintly. I glared at both of them on principle. Then Rowan leaned back slightly in his chair and looked at me with that same dark, steady intensity that always made me feel like prey standing too close to the mouth of something ancient. "No," he said. And then quieter. "Not because of you." A pause. Then, "For you." That one went straight into my chest and stayed there. I looked away first. Because I had to. Because if I didn't, they would see too much. And if they saw too much, I might actually have to admit the worst truth of all. That some frightened, selfish, broken part of me had already started wanting to stay. Outside, somewhere beyond the palace walls, war drums sounded faintly in the distance. Inside the room, the system's last hidden notification blinked once in the dark corner of my vision. Hidden route updated primary host's active king route. Initiated general route. Initiated shared end route, unlocked. My blood ran cold. Shared end route? Before I could think, the screen vanished. And when I looked up, both Caelan and Rowan were already watching me. Like they knew. Like they were waiting. Like the real game had only just begun. The war drums outside the palace walls did not stop. They rolled low through the night like distant thunder, steady and ominous, as if the kingdom itself had started breathing through clenched teeth. Inside the East residence, the silence felt worse. Because outside danger was simple. Outside danger had shape. Armies. Poison. Politics. But the danger inside this room? That was harder. That was warmer. That had eyes. And both of them were still on me. I sat on the edge of the bed with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of water cooling between my hands, trying very hard to act like I had not just seen a hidden route called shared end route flash in front of my face like a threat from God. Caelan stood near the window, moonlight carving silver across his profile. Rowan still sat in the chair beside the bed, his forearms braced over his knees, looking at me like he had no intention of blinking first. Which, unfortunately, made 3 of us. No one spoke. The silence stretched, tightened, turned into something else. I hated how aware I was of every small sound in the room. The crackle of the candles, the distant wind against the shutters, the faint rustle every time Rowan shifted, the slower, quieter sound of Caelan's breathing by the window. And underneath all of that, my own pulse. Still not normal. Still too fast. Still deeply traitorous. I swallowed and looked down at the cup in my hands. I should say something. Anything. Something useful. Practical. intelligent. Instead, what came out was, "So, are you both planning to stare at me until sunrise?" A beat. Then Rowan answered first. "If that keeps you alive, yes." I stared at him. That was not romantic enough to be flattering and not normal enough to be reassuring. Caelan's mouth twitched faintly from across the room. I turned toward him immediately and pointed. "You don't get to find that funny." I didn't say anything. "You were thinking something smug. That is a dangerous accusation to make without proof." I glared at him. He looked back with complete composure, moonlight and shadows making him look even more unfairly beautiful than usual. Which should have been illegal, or at least politically punishable. I looked away before my dignity dissolved any further. "Wonderful," I muttered. "I'm trapped in a palace with two emotionally repressed men who think threatening statements count as comfort." Rowan's gaze did not leave me. "Do you want comfort?" That was not a fair question. Especially not in that voice. Low. Steady. Too serious. I looked at him and immediately regretted it. Because he wasn't teasing. Neither of them were. Not anymore. Not after the system. Not after the truth. Not after everything that had cracked open between us tonight. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. Warmer too. I tightened my grip on the cup. "No," I said too quickly. Rowan tilted his head slightly. "A lie." I frowned. "You can't both keep doing that." "Doing what?" Caelan asked quietly. "Calling me a liar every time I try to preserve what little dignity I have left." Neither of them answered. And somehow that was worse. Because now it felt like the silence itself knew I was losing. Again, I exhaled hard and rubbed a hand over my face. I'm tired. That part was true. Deeply, painfully true. Tired in my bones. In my mind. In the soft, shaking place inside me that had spent too long surviving one thing after another, and was now being forced to process the fact that the two men who had haunted this entire story had once sat beside me in a school stairwell and eaten my lunch like starving boys pretending they weren't. I let my hand fall, then said more quietly, "I don't know what to do with any of this." The words sat in the room between us. Bare. Ugly. Honest. Caelan moved first. He left the window and crossed the room with the same measured calm he always had, but tonight there was no distance in it. No calculation I could see. He stopped in front of me and looked down. "You do not need to decide everything tonight," he said. I looked up at him. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his face, just enough to make him dangerous in a completely different way. Because this version of Caelan, quiet, close, stripped of his usual frost, felt infinitely harder to defend against. I forced out a weak laugh. "That's easy for you to say. You've apparently been emotionally ruining me across dimensions for years." For one brief, impossible second, he looked almost offended. Then Rowan spoke from beside us. "He has." I turned toward Rowan in disbelief. "You are not helping." "No," Rowan said evenly. "But I'm agreeing." That was somehow worse. I stared at both of them. Then, because apparently the universe wanted me dead from humiliation instead of poison, I said the thing I absolutely should not have said. "You're both too calm." Caelan's gaze sharpened slightly. "About what?" "This." I gestured vaguely between the three of us, which felt embarrassing and useless and still somehow not enough. "All of this. The systems. The other world. The fact that you've both apparently been in love with me since high school." Silence. Then Rowan said flatly, "I'm not calm." I looked at him and realized, with a sudden and deeply unhelpful drop in my stomach, that he was telling the truth. He didn't look calm. He looked contained, which was very different. His expression remained controlled, but his fingers had tightened against the arm of the chair. His jaw was set too hard. His eyes had gone dark in that particular way they did whenever he was trying not to act on impulse. And impulse, with Rowan, usually looked a lot like violence. Or something worse. Something more intimate. I looked away first. Because I had functioning self-preservation, actually. Unfortunately, that only left Caelan. Which was not better. He crouched in front of me again, just like he had before, bringing himself level with where I sat on the bed. His voice dropped. "If I were calm," he said, "I would have left you alone by now." My breath caught. No, absolutely not. That was not an acceptable thing to say to me in this emotional climate. I stared at him. He stared back. And slowly, painfully, the room shifted into something that no longer had room for pretense. No one moved. No one joked. No one hid behind palace titles or missions or strategy. For the first time since I woke in this world, it was just us. Not prince and guard. Not targets and system routes. Just three people carrying too much history and standing too close to the edge of something they could not step back from. I should have stopped it there. I should have. Instead, because my brain had apparently abandoned me in favor of emotional self-destruction, I asked, "Then why are you still here?" Caelan did not blink. His answer came so quietly I felt it more than heard it. "Because if I leave tonight, I won't sleep." That one hit first. Then Rowan's came after. "And if he leaves," Rowan said, voice rougher now, "I won't either." My fingers tightened around the cup. The air in the room felt too thick to breathe. I should say something. I should joke. Deflect. Run. Do literally anything except sit here letting them look at me like that. But my body had stopped listening to reason sometime around the poison incident. So instead, I whispered, "I don't know what you want from me." That was the truth. The raw, ugly center of it. Because love was one thing. Memory was another. But this was too much. Too intense. Too old. Too frighteningly real. I had no idea what they expected from me now that the truth was out. No idea what shape they wanted me to fit into. No idea what happened if I failed them. Caelan's gaze softened in a way that made my chest ache instantly. "Nothing you do not choose." I looked at him sharply. He held my gaze without wavering. "Not anymore." The words landed hard. And beside us, Rowan rose from the chair. The movement made me tense on instinct. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His expression shifted immediately. Not hurt exactly, but something close enough to make guilt twist low in my stomach. He stopped one step away from the bed. Then, very deliberately, he held out his hand. Palm up. Open. No force. No pressure. Just an offer. My throat went dry. The room had gone silent again. I stared at his hand. At the scar across his knuckles. At the simple, unbearable patience in the gesture. Then slowly, before I could think better of it, I set the cup aside and placed my hand in his. Warm. Rough. Steady. Rowan's fingers closed around mine carefully, as if he were holding something breakable. The contrast nearly undid me. And then Caelan reached for me too. Not my hand. My blanket. He drew it gently from my shoulders and folded it aside so it wouldn't tangle around me. His fingers brushed the side of my neck in the process. My entire body went still. The touch was light. Accidental, maybe. But it sent heat skittering down my spine anyway. Caelan noticed. His gaze lifted to mine. Sharp. Attentive. Too perceptive. I should have pulled away. Instead, I sat there trapped between Rowan's warmth and Caelan's nearness, pulse climbing higher with every passing second. No one spoke. No one needed to. The tension had already learned how to speak for us. Rowan's thumb moved once over the back of my hand. A tiny motion. Barely anything. And yet my breath caught all over again. I hated how much that did to me. Caelan saw that too. Of course he did. He always saw too much. His hand lifted slowly, giving me every possible chance to stop him. When I didn't, his fingertips brushed my cheek. Just once. A feather-light stroke. My breath left me in a shaky, humiliating exhale. Heat rose under my skin immediately. I looked at him like betrayal itself had taken human form. That's not fair, I whispered. His voice dropped lower. Neither is this. He meant all of it. The years. The loss. The second chance. The way we had found each other again, only to be dropped into a world already trying to devour us. And suddenly, very suddenly, I understood that they weren't asking me to solve it. They weren't even asking me to forgive it. They were just here, offering me the one thing I had not expected from either of them. Choice. That made it worse. Because if they had forced this, I could have hated them for it. If they had cornered me, I could have fought. But this terrible, gentle patience? This was impossible to defend against. I looked from Caelan to Rowan, then back again. And somewhere inside me, something exhausted finally loosened. Not all the way. Not enough to call it trust. But enough to stop running for one night. Stay, I heard myself say. The word came out so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. But both of them heard. I knew because the room changed the second it left my mouth. Rowan's fingers tightened once around mine. Caelan's gaze darkened. Not with cruelty. Not with danger. With restraint. Which somehow felt more dangerous than anything else. I swallowed. Then, because apparently I enjoyed making my own life worse, I added. Just don't make me regret it. Rowan answered first. Impossible. I frowned. That's not reassuring. It's honest. Caelan's mouth curved faintly. Then he leaned in. Slowly. deliberately, close enough that I felt his breath before his lips ever touched me. He paused there. A final question. A final chance to say no. I should have. I didn't. So he kissed me. And God. It was soft. That was the first thing. Not cold. Not sharp. Not possessive in the way I had expected from someone like him. Just devastatingly careful. The kind of kiss that did not ask to conquer. Only to confirm. His mouth moved against mine with restrained, aching slowness, like he had imagined this too many times to risk ruining it now. My fingers tightened helplessly in Rowan's hand. Caelan made the smallest sound against my lips. Not triumph. Relief. And that almost broke me more than the kiss itself. When he pulled back, it was only far enough for me to breathe. Barely. His forehead hovered close to mine. His voice, when it came, was rougher than before. You should have let me do that years ago. I blinked at him, dazed. Then stared. Excuse me. From my side, Rowan said dryly. I told you he'd say something arrogant the second he got what he wanted. I turned toward Rowan in offended disbelief. You were both waiting to bully me immediately after kissing me? Yes, Rowan said. Caelan, to my outrage, did not deny it. I opened my mouth to object. Rowan didn't let me. He released my hand only to cup my jaw instead, his touch warmer, firmer, rougher than Caelan's had been. Not careless. Never careless. But less polished. Less patient. Like he had spent too many years wanting, and had finally run out of the ability to pretend otherwise. His thumb brushed once along my lower lip. Then he kissed me too. And Rowan kissed like a man who had lost something once, and had no intention of losing it again. Not wild. Not uncontrolled. But deeper. Hungrier. The kind of kiss that pressed emotion into every inch of space between us until my thoughts blurred and my pulse turned traitor all over again. I made a soft, involuntary sound against his mouth. His grip at my jaw tightened instantly. Not enough to hurt. Just enough to make heat rush through me in one sharp wave. When he finally pulled back, I was breathing too fast and looking at him like he had personally committed a crime. Which, to be fair, he had. Several. He rested his forehead briefly against mine and muttered, voice low and rough. You taste exactly like the first thing I ever wanted and couldn't keep. That was a deeply unfair sentence. I stared at him, flushed and speechless and one insult away from dying. Then I looked between both of them and said the only thing my failing dignity could produce. You're both insane. Caelan brushed his fingers lightly down the side of my neck again. Yes, he said. Rowan's thumb traced once over my cheek. And you still asked us to stay. That was rude. Also true. I hated both of them. A little. Not enough. Never enough. The silence that followed changed again. Softer now. Heavier. The kind of quiet that settled after a door had finally been opened and no one could pretend it was still locked. Caelan sat beside me on the bed. Rowan stayed close on my other side. Too close. And yet not close enough, somehow. I leaned back first. Not intentionally. Just because my body was tired and warm and dangerously willing to forget caution for one reckless moment. My shoulder brushed Caelan's chest. My knee pressed lightly against Rowan's thigh. Neither of them moved away. Neither did I. No one reached for more. No one pushed. But the room stayed full of promise. Of awareness. Of all the things we were not doing and all the things we now knew we could. And maybe that was more dangerous than anything. Caelan's fingers found my hand where it rested in my lap and laced with mine quietly. Rowan's hand settled over the top of my blanketless knee, heavy and warm and grounding. No words. Just presence. I looked down at our hands. At the impossible reality of them. Then out toward the dark window where war waited beyond the palace walls. Tomorrow would be ugly. The court would move. Enemies would circle. The throne would demand blood. And the system, no matter how quiet tonight, was not done with us. But for this one breath. This one stolen stretch of night. I let myself sit between them and feel something dangerously close to peace. Just as my eyelids began to grow heavy, Siri's voice returned in a low mechanical whisper only I could hear. Shared end route synchronization increased. My eyes snapped open. Then the final notification appeared. New condition unlocked. To preserve the shared end route, Edrin must choose before the coronation. My blood ran cold. Choose. Choose what? Before I could react, the screen vanished. And beside me, without knowing what I had just seen, Caelan pressed one final kiss to my temple. While Rowan's hand tightened once on my knee like he already intended to fight whatever answer waited for us. Morning in the imperial palace arrived dressed like a lie. The sky beyond the carved windows glowed pale gold. Courtyard bells rang. Servants moved through the halls in soft-footed silence. Somewhere in the distance, soldiers shouted commands as the western gates opened for the day. Everything looked normal. Everything was not. I woke between two sleeping disasters. For one stunned second, I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't think. Because this was a problem. A very large, very warm, very handsome problem. Caelan slept on my left, still in yesterday's robes, one arm loosely draped over the blanket, near my waist like even unconscious, he had decided I was not allowed to disappear. Rowan slept on my right, half turned toward me, one hand still resting over mine from some time in the night, like he had fallen asleep, making sure I was still there. I stared at the ceiling, then at the curtains, then at the gods. Unbelievable, I whispered to absolutely no one. And because fate enjoyed humiliating me specifically, Rowan opened one eye. You're loud for someone who kissed both of us willingly. I jerked so hard I nearly headbutt Caelan. Rowan's mouth twitched. That traitor. You were asleep. I was resting. That is not the same thing. Caelan, without opening his eyes, said calmly, It is for Rowan. His personality is mostly decorative until noon. I turned so fast I almost got tangled in the sheets. You were awake too? Caelan opened his eyes at last. Slowly, gracefully, like a man who had no shame about being devastating before breakfast. I woke up when you started glaring at the ceiling. My face burned. You were both pretending to sleep? Yes, they said together. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course this was my life now. I sat up too quickly, dragging the blanket with me like some deeply betrayed ghost. Wonderful. Great. Love waking up in emotional warfare. Rowan pushed himself up on one elbow, hair slightly disheveled, expression still heavy with sleep, but no less dangerous for it. You talk too much when you're embarrassed. And you talk too much when you're alive, I shot back. That actually made him smile. A real one. Brief. Crooked. Ruinous. I stared at him, then immediately looked away because no, absolutely not, I refused to process that at this hour. Unfortunately, looking away only brought me face to face with Caelan, who was now sitting up too, calm and composed like he hadn't spent the night beside me after turning my emotional stability into confetti. Good morning, he said. The nerve. The audacity. The deeply offensive gentleness of that tone. I glared at him. I'm not speaking to either of you. Rowan leaned back against the headboard. You're literally speaking now. I pointed at him. See. This. This is why people poison princes. Caelan covered his mouth. His shoulders moved. I narrowed my eyes. Are you laughing at me again? No, he said. Liar. Absolute liar. And somehow, that stupid, ridiculous moment cracked the tightness in my chest just enough for me to breathe. For one tiny sliver of morning, we were not trapped in a cursed rout. We were not being hunted by politics and systems and fate. We were just here, warm, disheveled, alive. That should have scared me more than it did. But then I remembered the system's message from last night. And just like that, the warmth in my chest curdled back into dread. New condition unlocked. To preserve the shared end route, Edrin must choose before the coronation. My fingers tightened around the blanket. Choose. Choose what? Choose who? The answer felt obvious. Cruel. Designed to cut exactly where it hurt most. Because of course that's what the system would do. It had failed to force me. So now it would make me the knife instead. Caelan noticed first. He always did. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatically. Just enough. What happened? I looked at him. Then at Rowan. And for the first time since I met them in this world, I truly hated the future. Because if the system wanted me to choose one of them, then no matter what I did, someone would bleed. And I had already spent too many lives failing the people I loved. My throat tightened. Siri, I said quietly. The room cooled. Both of them sat up straighter. The gold panel flickered into existence at once, almost like she had been waiting. Of course she had. Shared end route. Active coronation event in 3 days final condition pending host choice required. Rowan's expression went flat. That was never a good sign. Caelan's gaze sharpened into something far colder. What choice? He asked. The panel glitched. Then responded. To stabilize the shared end route, auxiliary host Edrin must designate a primary bond before the coronation. The words sat in the room like poison. I felt sick. Rowan stood first. Not fast. Not violently. Which somehow made it worse. Remove it, he said. Condition required. Caelan rose too, slower, calmer, deadlier. No, he said. The panel flickered uncertainly. Primary bond designation is necessary to preserve route continuity. I laughed once. It sounded awful. Thin. Tired. Like a sound dragged out of a place in me already bruised. Of course it is. Because this world could not simply let me be happy. It had to make me earn it through suffering first. Very on brand. I pushed the blanket aside and swung my legs over the bed. Neither of them stopped me. They just watched. Too closely. Too carefully. Like they already knew I was about to do something either brave or catastrophically stupid. Possibly both. I stood up. The room swayed slightly. I ignored that. Then I looked directly at Ciri's glowing panel and said, "You really don't understand anything, do you?" Silence. The panel flickered once. I stepped closer. Not because I wasn't afraid. I was. But fear had gotten me nowhere except exhausted. So for once, I let anger hold me upright instead. You keep talking about routes and hosts and primary bonds like people are buttons you can press until they behave. Emotional route optimization is standard progression. No, I snapped. Manipulation is standard progression for you. The panel glitched. Good. I wanted it to glitch. I wanted it to choke on every ugly little lie it had fed me since I woke up here. You wanted them to become king and general, I continued, voice shaking now, but you didn't care what it cost. You wanted me to push them into place. You wanted me to seduce them, soothe them, tie them down emotionally so they'd stop resisting your script. Rowan's gaze had not left me. Neither had Caelan's. I could feel them there at my back like heat. Like support. Like something steady enough to lean on if I let myself. I didn't. Not yet. Because I needed to say this first. You keep acting like I'm just a catalyst, I said, quieter now. Like I'm a convenient body standing between your objectives and their refusal. The room had gone completely silent. Even the servants outside the corridor seemed far away. Ciri's panel pulsed faintly. Auxiliary host involvement remains central to route stabilization. I smiled. Not nicely. Not kindly. With every ounce of tired, stubborn fury I had left. Then let me stabilize it myself. That got everyone's attention. The panel brightened. Caelan's voice came low behind me. Edrin. I held up one hand slightly without turning around. Not to silence him. Just to ask for one more second. One more breath. One more chance to do this my way. Then I said the thing the system had never anticipated. I choose both. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The room went dead still. Then Ciri flashed violently red. Error. Invalid input primary bond selection requires singular designation. I smiled wider. Cold now. Certain. Then your system is broken. The panel flickered. Harder this time. I stepped closer until the gold light painted my face. Because I'm not choosing between them. My voice shook. I hated that. But I let it shake anyway. Because truth rarely arrived looking elegant. It arrived messy. Terrified. Breathless. And still real. I already lost too much in my first life, I said, staring straight into the glow. My sister. My home. The children I was raising alone. The future I thought I was building one exhausted day at a time. My throat tightened. I forced the words through it. And then I woke up here and spent every second thinking I was surviving for the chance to leave. A pause. Then softer. But somewhere along the way, I finally turned. Looked at them. Really looked. Caelan standing still as stone but with his hands clenched at his sides hard enough to betray him. Rowan staring at me like the world had narrowed to a single point, and it was me. And God. God, I was in trouble. Because I loved them. Not perfectly. Not gracefully. Not in a way I understood all at once. But enough. Enough that the truth of it hurt. Enough that denying it now would be its own kind of violence. My eyes burned. I ignored that too. I don't want a route where one of you gets left behind, I said. I don't want a future built on choosing the person who hurts less to lose. Caelan's expression changed. Tiny. Devastating. Rowan took one involuntary step toward me. I kept going before courage could leave me. If I have to choose, I said, turning back to the panel, then I choose the life where all three of us stay. Ciri glitched violently. Lines of text scrambled across the gold light. Then, unauthorized route declaration detected. Shared end route instability, critical emergency correction commencing. No, Caelan said. And the room changed. Not metaphorically. Actually, the air pressure dropped so sharply the candles bent. The windows rattled. The panel spasmed. I spun around. Caelan was already moving. Not toward me. Toward Ciri. Toward the impossible glowing interface, like a man who had finally found something worthy of his full, unmasked rage. His expression was no longer calm. No longer composed. And for the first time, I understood exactly why an empire feared him. Because Caelan angry was not loud. He was precise. He reached straight into the gold light with his bare hand. And somehow, his fingers caught. The panel shrieked. Not in words. In static. In fracture. In something mechanical being forced to feel fear. I stared. That was not supposed to be possible. Caelan, I told you, he said softly to the system, not looking at me, that if you touched him again, I would finish this. The gold light cracked under his hand. Cracked. Like glass. My mouth fell open. Rowan moved next. He was faster. Rougher. Less controlled, and somehow no less terrifying. He caught the opposite edge of the panel and dragged it down hard, as if he were ripping open the throat of the thing that had been haunting us from the start. Ciri screamed. This time in actual words. Primary hosts, stop. System core damage will destabilize world continuity. Caelan's face did not change. Then rewrite it. Impossible. Wrong, Rowan said. His voice was all blade. All promise. All the violence of a man who had already chosen what he would burn. You're just not the one writing it anymore. The panel splintered. Gold shards of light burst across the room like shattered sunlight. The walls shook. Outside, palace bells began ringing wildly. Alarm bells. Not for soldiers. For something deeper. Something in the story itself tearing loose. Ciri's voice fractured into static. Then into pieces. Then into one final broken sentence. If the route severs, your original world return will be permanently inaccessible. I froze. Everything stopped. Not the room. Not the shaking. Not the brothers literally ripping fate apart with their bare hands. Me. Because there it was. The last chain. The last bait. The final door the system had dangled in front of me from the beginning. Go home. Return. Leave. My chest tightened. My original world. My sister's children. The little apartment. The long nights. The exhausted life I had once thought I wanted back more than anything. For 1 second. One brutal second. Grief tore through me so hard I almost folded. Because I would never see it again. Never walk those streets. Never hold the children I had raised. Never go back and fix all the things I had left unfinished. And that hurt. God, it hurt. It felt like mourning someone who had already died twice. Caelan's eyes snapped to mine instantly. Not because I said anything. Because he saw it. Of course he saw it. The grief. The loss. The impossible choice hidden under the threat. His hand loosened on the panel. Just slightly. Enough to ask without words. If you want to go, I will let you. And Rowan. Rowan looked at me too. No demand. No anger. No possessiveness. Just something raw and devastating and honest enough to ruin me forever. If you leave, I will survive it. But only because I won't be given a choice. That did it. That was the thing that broke me. Not the system. Not the route. Them. The way they would let me go even now. Even after everything. Even when it would destroy them. My eyes burned so hard I could barely see. And suddenly, fiercely, clearly. I knew. Not because the system had told me. Not because fate had pushed me. Not because this world had trapped me. I knew because I had already been choosing them in 100 tiny ways since the moment I arrived. Every time I stepped between them and blood. Every time I stayed. Every time I looked at them and did not run. I laughed once through the tears. Small. Broken. Real. Then I said, voice shaking. I'm not going back. The room stilled. Caelan stopped breathing. Rowan's grip tightened hard enough to crack light. I took one step forward. Then another. Until I stood between them and the dying system. And with my whole ruined, terrified, stubborn heart, I said the final truth out loud. I already chose. My voice cracked. I didn't care. I choose this life. I looked at Rowan. Then at Caelan. Then back at the wreckage of the thing that had tried to script us from the beginning. And I choose them. The panel screamed. Then split clean down the center. A blinding surge of gold exploded outward. I felt heat. Light. Pressure. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor. Again. At this point, I was beginning to suspect destiny simply wanted me horizontal. The room was a wreck. Curtains half torn loose. Candles extinguished. Glass shattered. The air still humming faintly with whatever impossible thing had just happened. And the system was gone. No gold light. No panels. No missions. No voice in my head. Nothing. For the first time since waking up in this world. Silence. Real silence. I stared upward in disbelief. Then Rowan's face appeared above mine. Sharp. Tense. Terrified. Edrin. And immediately after Caelan's. Calmer on the surface. No less wrecked underneath. Can you hear us? I blinked once. Twice. Then, because I was still me even at the edge of emotional apocalypse, I said weakly, "If one of you asks if I know what day it is, I'm leaving." Rowan shut his eyes. Just briefly. Like his soul had nearly escaped his body. Caelan let out one short breath that sounded suspiciously like relief breaking. Then both of them reached for me at once. Naturally. Because apparently boundaries had died with the system. Rowan hauled me upright by the waist. Caelan caught my face between his hands like he needed to confirm I was still physically real. "You idiot," Rowan muttered. I stared at him. "That's not a thank you. You destroyed the return route." "No," I said. And for the first time in this entire story, the answer came easy. Steady. Certain. "We destroyed it." Caelan's gaze locked onto mine. Something fragile and impossible moved through his face. Then he lowered his forehead to mine. Not elegant. Not princely. Just tired and human and close enough that my chest ached from it. "You stayed," he whispered. There was so much in those two words that I could not survive all of it at once. So I didn't try. Instead, I lifted one hand and caught Rowan's sleeve. Then the other and touched Caelan's wrist. Grounding myself in both of them. In this. In now. In case it wasn't painfully obvious, I muttered, yes. Rowan made a rough sound that might have been a laugh, and might have been him surviving by force. Caelan actually smiled. Not his usual small, dangerous curve. A real one. Soft. Unshielded. It nearly killed me. Then, because the universe believed in never letting me recover emotionally, the door burst open. A dozen guards flooded in with drawn swords. And behind them, Minister Havel. Several court officials. Half the palace, apparently. All of them froze dead at the sight before them. Which, to be fair, was deeply suspicious. The East residence looked like a magical crime scene. I was barefoot and disheveled in nightclothes. The crown prince was kneeling too close to me. The second prince had one arm around my waist like he had every intention of keeping it there. No one said anything. Then one very unfortunate minister made the mistake of glancing between us and asking, "Your Highnesses?" Silence. I closed my eyes. No, because whatever happened next was going to be socially unrecoverable. I just knew it. Caelan rose first. Perfectly composed again in under 3 seconds, which was frankly insulting. Rowan stood more slowly, still looking like he'd happily kill everyone in the room if they breathed wrong. And then, before I could stop him, before diplomacy could save us, before my soul could evacuate my body, Caelan said calmly, "There will be a change to the succession announcement." The room went still. Minister Havel blinked. "Why, Your Highness?" Caelan's expression remained unreadable. "Prepare the court." Rowan's hand settled at the small of my back. Warm. Claiming. Deeply unhelpful. "For what?" the minister asked weakly. And then Rowan answered. "For the future of the empire." That was not an answer. That was a threat disguised as administration. And yet, the room obeyed it instantly. Because of course it did. 3 days later, the coronation. The throne hall blazed with gold. Silk banners fell in crimson waves from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of nobles knelt in layered robes. Generals lined the central aisle in armor and ceremonial steel. Priests stood at the altar platform with bowls of sacred oil and scrolls older than the dynasty itself. And at the center of it all stood Caelan, crowned in black and gold, beautiful enough to start wars over, cold enough to finish them. King. Real king. Not route objective. Not mission endpoint. A man who had chosen his throne with his own hands. At his right stood Rowan in dark military dress, sword at his hip, expression sharp enough to cut the room in half. General. No less terrifying for the title. If anything more. And me? I stood one step below the throne dais in formal guard attire, so heavily embroidered it probably cost more than my old apartment rent for a year. I looked expensive and deeply suspicious. Exactly as intended. The priest's voice carried through the hall. By blood, by crown, by steel, and by oath. I tried to focus. I really did. But unfortunately, both of them kept looking at me. Not constantly. They had public dignity, unlike some people. But enough. Enough that every time I lifted my eyes, one of them was already there waiting. It was infuriating. Also wildly bad for my blood pressure. The ceremony continued. The nobles bowed. The oaths were spoken. The crown settled. And then came the final court declaration. Minister Havel, who looked 10 years older after this week alone, stepped forward and unrolled the final royal decree with the energy of a man being forced to read his own execution notice. He cleared his throat. Then read. By command of His Majesty King Caelan, with full military witness under General Rowan, the royal household hereby recognizes the formal elevation of Guard Edrin to inner palace consort and imperial guardian. The hall exploded. Gasps. Whispers. One lady in the third row almost dropped dead from shock. Honestly? Valid. I stared straight ahead and contemplated simply evaporating on the spot. Because this was not a conversation we had completed. We had discussed feelings. We had discussed survival. We had not discussed being publicly upgraded into the Empire's most confusing relationship scandal. I turned my head one fraction. Very slowly. Caelan did not look at me, which was suspicious. Rowan absolutely did. And the tiny, shameless twitch at the corner of his mouth told me everything I needed to know. Traitor. Absolute traitor. The minister, somehow still alive, continued reading with visible spiritual suffering. With autonomous authority over the king's personal security, private residence access, and direct family succession protection. My mouth fell open. Family succession protection? I looked at them both in horror. Caelan finally met my gaze. Calm. Steady. Utterly unrepentant. Then he said, for the entire throne hall to hear. You wanted a family. My heart stopped. The hall vanished. The nobles vanished. The gold and banners and scandal and politics and all of it. Gone. Because that sentence went straight through every defense I had left. He remembered. Not just the lunchbox. Not just me. That too. The children I had raised. The life I had built around caring for people after grief had hollowed me out. The thing I had lost before I even came here. He remembered. And beside him, Rowan added in that same low, dangerous voice that now somehow felt more like home than fear. So we're giving you one. That was it. That was the end of me. I did not cry. I came dangerously close. But I did not cry. Because I still had standards. Instead, I bowed my head to hide the violence of emotion, trying to break my face apart in public. Your Majesties, I muttered, voice rough. This is a deeply unfair place to emotionally ambush someone. Rowan looked entirely too pleased with himself. Caelan, to my complete shock, almost laughed. And the court, the entire horrified, scandalized, politically doomed court, could only watch as their new king stepped down from the throne dais, stopped in front of me, and extended his hand. Not as ruler to servant. Not as prince to guard. As man to man. As choice to choice. As future to future. I looked at his hand. Then at Rowan beside him. Then out across the hall of people who would absolutely spend the next 100 years making this everyone's problem. And slowly, still a little terrified, still a little overwhelmed, still very much myself, I placed my hand in his. The throne hall erupted again. I ignored it, because Rowan's hand settled warm and solid at my back. Because Caelan's fingers tightened around mine. Because for the first time in a very long time, I was not standing alone at the center of my own life. And maybe that was enough. No, not maybe. It was. Epilogue home. 6 months later, the Empire still had not recovered from us. Frankly, neither had I. King Caelan ruled exactly like everyone feared he would, cold, efficient, impossible to manipulate, and merciless toward corruption. General Rowan reorganized the military, crushed 2 noble rebellions, and became the kind of national threat children were probably already being warned about before bed. And me? I became something the Empire had no title for. Part guard, part consort, part walking political scandal. Entirely exhausted, which was apparently my destiny in every world. Still, it was not a bad life. Annoying, complicated, occasionally illegal feeling, but not bad. The best part came quietly, not in a throne hall, not in a dramatic declaration, but on an ordinary spring afternoon when Caelan found me in the inner garden trying to teach 2 recently orphaned noble children how to feed the koi fish without falling into the pond. They had lost their parents in a carriage accident at the border. No surviving household. No one willing to keep them except for political reasons. I had taken one look at them and immediately made it everyone's problem. Naturally, Caelan stood at the edge of the stone path, watching the little girl argue with the little boy over fish pellets while I crouched between them in full diplomatic crisis mode. "You're holding the bowl wrong," I told the boy. "I'm not. You absolutely are. It's because she pushed me. I barely touched you," Caelan said from behind me. "You've acquired more children." I looked over my shoulder. He was dressed in lighter court robes today, crown absent, dark hair loose down his back in a way that should have been banned for public safety. I frowned. I didn't acquire them. They're temporarily attached to me. He glanced at the children, then at me, then said with complete seriousness, "That is how acquisition usually works." I narrowed my eyes. Then the little girl tugged my sleeve and whispered loudly, "Is that your husband?" I choked. Absolutely choked. The boy gasped like she had just committed treason. Caelan, the menace, did not miss a beat. "Yes," he said. I whipped around. "No one asked you." He looked mildly offended. "She did." The little girl looked delighted. The little boy looked scandalized. And then Rowan walked into the garden carrying a wooden practice sword over one shoulder and ruined the last scraps of my dignity forever. The little girl gasped again, then pointed at Rowan. "What about him?" Silence. Dead silence. I stared at the pond, at the sky, at the inevitable collapse of civilization. Then Rowan, because apparently public menace was contagious in this household, said, "That depends. Are you old enough to hear political answers or honest ones?" I covered my face with both hands. The children screamed with laughter. Caelan looked entirely too pleased. Rowan looked even worse. And there in the middle of the garden, surrounded by spring sunlight, koi fish, political ruin, and the deeply unserious family I had somehow ended up with. I laughed. Really laughed. Not because life had become easy. It hadn't. Not because the world had become kind. It hadn't. But because after everything, after grief, after loneliness, after 2 lives spent carrying too much alone, I had made it somewhere warm, somewhere loud, somewhere impossible and alive in mine. And when Rowan came to stand behind me and rested his hand at my waist, when Caelan stepped close enough that our sleeves brushed, when the children kept arguing over fish like the future wasn't fragile and precious and right in front of us, I finally understood something simple enough to survive. Home was never a place I had to return to. It was something I had built again, with them. And this time, I intended to stay.